Your true wealth is your time and freedom. Money is just a tool for trading your time. It's a container to store your economic energy until you're ready to deploy it. But the whole world has been turned away from real money and has been fooled into using currency. A deceitful impostor that is silently stealing your two most valuable assets, your time and your freedom. Welcome to the rabbit hole.
People do not understand the difference between currency and money. Currency is a medium of exchange, a unit of account. It is portable, durable, divisible, and something called fungible. Fungible means that each unit is the same as the next unit. $1 in my pocket buys the same amount as $1 in your pocket. Money is all of those things plus a store of value over a long period of time. Even financial planners, bankers, your accountant, they don't understand the difference between currency and money. The currency in your pocket is a medium of exchange. It's a unit of account because it's got numbers on it. It's somewhat durable, it's portable, it's divisible in that you can make change, and it's fungible. $1 in my pocket buys the same amount as $1 in your pocket. But because governments can print more and more and more of it and dilute the currency supply, it's continually transferring wealth out of your pocket, out of your bank account, to the government and to the banking system. The reason that gold and silver are the optimum form of money is because of their properties. It's an easy medium of exchange because gold and silver store a large amount of value in a very small area. It's a unit of account. Pure gold has the same value all over the planet. So an ounce of gold buys the same amount here in Egypt as it would in China or in the United States. It's durable. The same gold that Egyptians were using in trade 5,000 years ago is still here with us today. It does not corrode. It's divisible. You can make change with it. It's very portable. You could use something like oil as money. It's just that you can't carry around a barrel of oil on your back. It's fungible. Pure gold is the same wherever it is on Earth. Pure silver is the same wherever it is on Earth. It's limited in quantity. That's the reason that it maintains its purchasing power. Governments cannot print it. Over the last 5,000 years, only gold and silver have maintained their purchasing power. There have been thousands upon thousands of fiat currencies, currencies that are unbacked by gold or silver, and they have all gone to zero. It's a 100% failure rate.
Well, fiat currency, of course, is a currency that exists at the dictate or by fiat from a government. You see, they have their printing presses, and the paper money rolls off the printing presses. And then they give it the fiat designation, which makes the currency official. It's just worthless paper. But when Ben Bernanke gives it the special sign, and they have the cult meeting at the Federal Open Market Committee meetings, it suddenly becomes currency.
If you look at what's really going on, it's a con game. And so there's confidence. Well, the Federal Reserve is very forthright about what they're doing. If you read their websites, they'll tell you it's a confidence game. They tell you that there's no intrinsic value in their money. They'll tell you that they print it backed by absolutely nothing. They actually display all these facts. But if you tell somebody in the public that this stuff is created out of thin air, there's no backing whatsoever, it's absolutely worthless, it's about as valuable as monopoly money, they'll look at you like you're nuts.
Is there an example throughout history of a fiat currency, a piece of paper that's unbacked by anything, surviving?
Short answer, no. Long answer, no.
The dollar has lost 95% of its purchasing power since the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913, so not very good as a store of value. One of the things I do is just a way to get the audience's attention is I have a slide, and there are three pictures on the slide. One is a pile of monopoly money. The other one is a pile of Federal Reserve notes, what Americans would call paper money. The other one is a solid gold American Eagle 1 ounce coin. The title of the slide is, which of these is not like the other? I've shown this slide to groups of Ivy League University professors, and I've also shown it to children, you know, kind of 5 years old, my nieces and nephews and so forth. And when the professors look at it, they say, well, clearly the dollars are not like the others because gold has no role as money and monopoly money is junk, and The American dollar is a store of value, so that's not like the other. But the children look at it and they say, well, the gold coin is not like the other because the other two are just piles of paper and the gold coin is clearly something different. So my question to the audience is, who's smarter, a 5-year-old or an Ivy League professor?
Before World War I, each note that a Treasury issued would say that there have been deposited with the United States Treasury $20 in gold coin payable to the bearer upon demand. The money was in the vault. The currency was a note they gave you that was a claim check, only a claim check on the money, the same as if you go to the dry cleaners and you give them your shirt and they give you a claim check for your shirt. The value is that shirt at the dry cleaners, not the piece of paper that says that you own that shirt. So our currency that circulated was the paper US dollars, and they were claim checks on money.
Money must be a store of value and maintain its purchasing power over long periods of time. National currencies are really a tool used by the government and the financial sector to leech away your time and your freedom by stealing your purchasing power. So rather than storing your economic energy, currencies leak. Now compare that to the gold and silver the Egyptians were using. Like I started with, it still wasn't money because it wasn't interchangeable yet. But they were on the right track, as gold and silver have proven over thousands of years to be the ultimate store of value. Gold is only formed when a star explodes, a supernova, and it stays around forever. This is one of the properties that make it the ultimate money.
You know, people are amazed that after 5,000 years, the pyramids are still here. But what I'm more amazed at is that the currency that the people that built this were using, that currency, that gold and silver that they were using in trade on a daily basis, is still around today. It may have been melted down and re-refined and it's in a coin or a bar or in some piece of jewelry, but it's still with us today and it still purchases something.
Yes, it is the ultimate money because there is nothing else even in the same league. It's divisible, it's permanent, it's a store of value, it's a unit of account, it's got everything you want out of money, but it doesn't go away and it can't be increased. That is what makes gold the most beautiful money of all. What more could you ask out of a money?
It keeps governments under control. You can maintain a solvent system. Governments don't like gold at present because they're getting away with the fiat currencies, and they'll do everything they can to discredit it as an asset class. I mean, my goodness, gold has outperformed the Dow Jones Industrial Average in each of the last 7 years, yet it's not considered a legitimate asset class. Why?
They can't print it.
They can't print it, no.
The proper definition of inflation, I use Milton Friedman's definition. Inflation is an expansion of the currency supply. Deflation is a contraction of the currency supply. If you expand the currency supply, eventually prices will rise, and if you contract the currency supply, eventually prices will fall. This is a pool, but it's not a pool of water. This is the currency pool, and these are prices. And if you expand the currency supply, prices like a sponge in water have to rise to suck up the excess currency. Governments never stop printing more currency and adding currency to circulation. Therefore, prices keep on going up, not because the stuff that you're trying to buy is changing. What has changed is the currency purchases less and less. It's the currency going down, not prices going up.
The truth is, what we have that makes our world work right now is a big story. None of it's real. You know, before we had currency, we had barter. I'll give you 3 coconuts and you give me 4 fish, because that's kind of a fair exchange on coconuts to fish. But that got complicated, so we had to invent this thing called money to be a divisible, portable medium of exchange. We lost that a long time ago when we lost having things of value be our currency, and now we have this thing called numbers and accounts. But trust me, it is not real. It's a big made-up story.
One of the biggest make-believe stories ever is called quantitative easing, which sounds complex, but it's really just a smoke and mirrors term for currency creation. QE started with the banking bailouts back in 2009. This currency was created out of thin air and then given to the banks, who paid themselves record bonuses in reward for crashing the world economy. This is a global phenomenon, but all you have to remember for now is that whether it's QE bailouts or stimulus programs, these are all just voodoo, hocus-pocus terms for increased currency creation.
Base currency in the United States. This is the number of paper dollars that exist, basically. It took 200 years to go from no dollars in existence to 825 billion. And then we had the bailouts, and then we had QE1, quantitative easing, then QE2, and then we had QE3, and then QE4, and then soon we're going to have QE57 and QE382. It isn't just here. This is what the Canadian currency supply looks like. This is Australia, South Africa, Russia, Singapore, India, China. Every government on the planet is doing this insane deficit spending and expanding their currency supplies, and history shows there is no example of this turning out well.
It is sometimes amazing that we haven't experienced more inflation than we have. If they keep expanding the money supply so vastly, why aren't our prices growing faster than they really are? And the answer is that a good chunk of the money that the Fed created has been shipped overseas. I remember early in my research, I heard this expression that the Americans have exported their inflation. I thought, what is that? How can you export your inflation? Well, now I understand. You export your inflation by simply sending all these dollars that you created to these other countries, and then they send you their refrigerators and their cars and whatever, their TV sets. So you get hardware and they get little pieces of paper. It's a great deal for the American people for a while. For a while. Sooner or later, all of those pigeons come home to roost. When the time comes, when the rest of the world is saying, we don't want to play this game anymore, Uncle Sam's dollars are just becoming worthless, there are too many of them, we've got to find something else other than American dollars, then those dollars start to come back to America. People say, we don't want them anymore. What do we do with them? Once it becomes a flood and it starts to rush back, now we are getting our former exported inflation brought back to us, and then we'll see the quantity of money inside the United States grow much more rapidly even than the Federal Reserve can create it. That's when we will really see the tanking of the US dollar in terms of what it will buy.
It's punishing the very people who are most productive in society. In other words, the people that produce more than they consume and save the difference. The problem is that those productive people, the savers, save in their national currency. And unfortunately, the national currency is just a fiat piece of paper at this point. So when it's destroyed through runaway inflation, that $100,000 that you were hoping to retire on doesn't exist. And the things that you were going to buy with it and provide for others don't exist either. Now what are you going to do?
When governments do this kind of stuff to their currency supply, they debase it. Eventually it comes back in inflation. People sense the loss of their purchasing power. They rush back to gold and silver, and they bid the value of the gold and silver up in the country until it meets or exceeds the value of all the currency in circulation. This is a process that's been going on over and over again throughout history, except this time it's happening on a global scale. It has never before happened in all countries at once. And that means that this is the greatest wealth transfer in history. Therefore, it's the greatest opportunity in history, and it's not going to happen again in your lifetime.
Your true wealth is your time and your freedom. Money is a trading tool that stores the economic energy that is your time and freedom, whereas currencies leak them away. Gold and silver are the ultimate money simply because of their properties. Fiat currencies are based solely on confidence and always return to their intrinsic value of zero. Governments don't like gold because it imposes restraint. Rising prices are a symptom of an expanding currency supply, and gold and silver always account for an expanding currency supply.
My challenge to you is to stop calling currency money. It's a crucial first step towards setting your mind free of all this economic voodoo and changing your context. Gold and silver have been the predominant currencies for about 5,000 years. But it wasn't until somewhere between 680 BC and 630 BC that they became money. That's when they were minted into coins of equal weights somewhere in Lydia, where each coin was the same size and had the same weight. This made them interchangeable. It's called fungible. At that point, they became useful as a unit of account, a measurement. You could price a good or a service in those gold or silver coins in a certain number of them. And it was always the same for anybody whenever they were buying that good or service. But it wasn't until they made their way to the world's first free market society, the prototype of democracy, the cradle of civilization, Athens, that they exploded in use. Suddenly, money, found its natural home, the free markets. So this begs the question, what went wrong? How did such a great and powerful civilization fall? The answer lies in the same pattern that we see throughout history: too much greed and too much war. It was when the Athenians got involved in the Peloponnesian Wars, a war with Sparta, that their monetary problems began. First, they lost access to their gold and silver mines. They were also paying armies that were on foot, and they were miles and miles away from Athens. So as they pay their armies to buy goods and services from the local populations, a deflation occurs in Athens because they're sending all of their coinage out of the city. Then they started debasing their coinage to pay for the war. If you take in 1,000 coins in taxes, and then you melt those down, those gold coins, and you mix 50% copper into your gold, now you can mint 2,000 coins. So if you take in only 1,000 coins, but you spend 2,000 coins, what is that called? That is deficit spending. Athens began to do that during this war with Sparta. They also had these great public works, which were very expensive, and they finished the Temple of Athena Nike during the truce in the middle. There was a 6-year truce in the middle of this 27-year war. So they didn't stop their great public works and allow their market economy to heal from the expense of this war. As they debased their coinage, people would take the new debased coins at face value at first, until there were a whole bunch of those. And there's something called Gresham's Law, where people tend to save to keep the thing that's rare, and they spend the thing that's common into circulation first. So all of the gold and silver coins started to disappear from circulation and become quite rare, and it was just these copper coins. Suddenly, it took a whole bunch of copper coins to buy a gold or silver coin, one of those old gold or silver coins. This is the first time that gold or silver ever had a price. Before that, everything was measured in a weight of gold and silver. So a large factor in Athens' downfall was the expense of war, the expansion of empire, the debasement of their currency, the eventual inflation that was caused. You know, they minted these coins until they became nothing but flecks of copper. This was actually the world's first hyperinflation. And what it did was it financially debilitated Athens to the point where in 404 BC they surrendered to Sparta. And eventually they became nothing but a satellite of Rome. The thing that amazes me is how history just keeps on repeating and repeating and repeating, and we never learn from all of our stupid mistakes. We just repeat the same stupid mistakes over and over and over again. Today we are doing the same thing that the Athenians did that caused the loss of their great culture. We're doing the same currency debasement. We're doing the same deficit spending, and it's for the same reasons. It's for war, and it's for great public works.
What you've just seen is the first recorded example of one of the most predictable hidden secrets of money, the 7 stages of empire. It's a long-term cycle that echoes throughout history right to this very day, and is basically a societal pendulum that swings from quality money to quantity currency and back again to quality money. It always plays out in 7 stages. It always ends with gold delivering a knockout blow to debased currencies. And it goes like this. Stage 1. A country starts out with good money, which is either gold or silver, or it's backed by gold or silver. Stage 2. As it develops economically and socially, it begins to take on more and more economic burdens, adding layer upon layer of public works. Stage 3. As its economic affluence grows, so does its political influence, and it increases expenditures to fund a massive military. Stage 4. Eventually, it puts its military to use, and expenditures explode. Stage 5. To fund the war, it steals the wealth of its people by debasing their coinage with base metals, or by replacing their money with currency that can be created in unlimited quantities. Stage 6. The loss in purchasing power of the expanded currency supply is sensed by the population and the financial markets, triggering a loss of faith in the currency. Stage 7. A mass movement out of currency into precious metals and other tangible assets takes place. The currency collapses, and gold and silver rise in price as they account for the huge quantity of currency that was created. This process transfers massive wealth to those who had the foresight to position themselves beforehand in real money, gold and silver.
You know, our monetary system basically steals from the poor and middle class and transfers the wealth to the banks. We see this throughout history, and it's just repeating over and over again. What's happening in Greece right now is basically the same thing that was happening back in 407 BC. The deficit spending to fund all of these public works and the debasement of their currency supply caused them to become nothing but a satellite of Rome. Today, they're becoming nothing but a satellite of the banks.
Way back in my youth, I was 11 years old when we went from a silver-based monetary system to a purely fiat system. People saw that silver was money, they got used to it, they didn't really think about it. And in 1965, under President Johnson, he basically said, well, silver's too valuable to be money. We're going to just start putting out these substitutes, which were what we call cupro-nickel coins. They were nickel, they were copper plated with nickel at the time. And of course, the metal value was far less. And I understood that as a kid, and yet very few adults really seemed to get the idea of what was really going on. There were a few, and it only takes a few. And of course, the Gresham's law took effect, so the currency came out of circulation rapidly. It's very interesting to me, you know, knowing monetary history fairly well, is they're always, you know, put out in silver-looking or gold-looking form. I mean, in most cases, you'll have, in fact, they look rather interesting. I mean, some of them are like silver on the inside and gold on the outside with the look. They have no value at all, really, other than melt value of pot metal. To me, it's sort of at a subconscious level. Why are they making them gold-colored? Why are they making them silver-colored? I think there's an inherent knowledge in the human species that knows that gold and silver have value. So if they look in their pocket and they see something gold-colored or silver-colored, it gives them kind of a warm, fuzzy feeling. And it's like, oh yeah, you know, but there's no value in these coins, really.
The next question is, how does this affect you?
Everybody thinks the US dollar is still as good as gold, and it hasn't been since 1971. This is the world monetary systems. From 1873, when Germany went on the classical gold standard, where each unit of currency is backed up by an equivalent amount of gold in the treasury. In the United States, $20 bill, $20 gold piece in the vaults. Go into any bank, slap down your currency, which was a receipt for money, a claim check on money, ask for your money, gold and silver, and they would give it to you. So this shows, this is currency, this is money. Otherwise, there was no reason for any government to store gold in their vaults and then print this currency that was backed by gold. This is what gives confidence in that, and it gives governments the ability to start this scam in the first place, where they print these receipts for gold, and then they can print more of them than gold that exists. And that happened when we got to World War I, and all the combatants stopped redemption rights. You could no longer go in the bank and trade your pounds, lira, marks, francs, no longer redeemable in gold, and they lit up the printing presses and started printing like crazy. Then between the wars, they went on something called the gold exchange standard, where currencies would be backed partially by gold. So in the United States, under the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, the Federal Reserve was allowed to put $50 worth of claim checks on gold, currency in circulation, backed up by only $20 worth of gold. So it was a 40% reserve ratio. For every $20 gold piece in the vault, they could put $50 in circulation.
We're the dollars of the nation on parade. We're the biggest batch of dollars ever made. Oh, we used to march by millions, but now we march by billions, and maybe we'll be trillions for your dead. We're the dollars.
Then we get to 1944. Now, during both wars, Europe paid the U.S. with gold. During World War I, the U.S. didn't get into the war until the very end of it. We didn't really have troops on the ground here in any quantity until the last 6 months of the war. So for the first 4 years or so, we're selling you all of, you take all of your young men off of the farms and turn them into soldiers. You take your factories that make toasters and they start making machine guns. Your factories that made cars are now building tanks. And so you turn your economy toward war, and all of your consumer goods and your grains had to be imported from the United States, and you paid us with gold. Then in World War II, Hitler starts saber rattling in 1936, annexes Austria in 38, invades Poland in 39. Pearl Harbor wasn't until the end of 1941. We didn't have troops on the ground until, I believe, August of 42. So again, there's like 6 years where you're paying us with your gold and we're selling you stuff. This is where Americans have this myth that war is good for the economy. War is good for the economy if you're not in it and you're selling them the tools of the trade.
Yes, America's national income gets bigger and bigger. In 1943, it was $142 billion. That was double the 1939 figure, triple the figure for 1933.
But by the end of World War II, the U.S. had 2/3 of all the world's monetary gold, the central bank gold, and the rest of the world had to share the other third, and Europe had none. So the world monetary system was no longer going to work. It would collapse. But we had made all these loans of dollars to Europe, so Europe was flooded with dollars. And so representatives from around the world met at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire in 1944. They came up with a new world monetary system called the Bretton Woods system, where every currency on the planet, with the exception of just a few, they would be backed by the US dollar, and the US dollar would then be backed by gold at $35 per ounce. This gave confidence to all currencies. So this gave the world stability, and it pegged all the world's currencies to each other through the dollar to gold. So there was no such thing as the Forex. Currencies didn't float. The exchange rates were fixed year after year, and this helped to make world trade boom. Then the dollar standard starts because we kept on printing dollars. Under the Bretton Woods system, there was no reserve ratio established where the US actually had to have a certain amount of gold for how many dollars we created. So we had done a bunch of deficit spending for Korea, for Vietnam, for Johnson's Great Society, and expanded the currency supply, the amount of paper dollars in circulation, and exported them all over the world. And then in the 60s, Charles de Gaulle, president of France, realizes that we don't have the gold to back up the dollars.
Le fait que beaucoup d'États acceptent par principe des dollars au même titre que de l'or entraîne les Américains à s'endetter et à s'endetter gratuitement vis-à-vis de l'étranger, car ce qu'ils lui doivent, ils le lui payent avec des dollars qu'il ne tient qu'à eux d'émettre. Nous estimons nécessaire que les échanges internationaux soient établis comme c'était le cas avant les grands malheurs du monde, sur une base monétaire indiscutable et qui ne porte la marque d'aucun pays en particulier. Quelle base? En vérité, on ne voit pas qu'il puisse y avoir réellement de critères, d'étalons autres que l'or.
And he starts asking, France asks for their gold and trades in the dollars. And at that point, other countries saw this and start jumping on board. And the US lost 50% of its gold from 1959 to 1971, but we still had in 71 about 12 times more dollars that we had created than there was gold. And this run on the bank, basically, the US now being the bank, this is a giant worldwide bank run, because the US, for the second time, had committed a fraud and created more receipts for gold than there was gold. It's that simple. And then finally, the markets sort of sensed this, and Nixon was forced to take us off the gold standard, because if he had paid out gold until it got to zero, once we couldn't pay on some of those dollars, the entire worldwide monetary system would have collapsed.
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States. In full cooperation with the International Monetary Fund and those who trade with us, we will press for the necessary reforms to set up an urgently needed new international monetary system.
And on August 15th, 1971, all the world's currencies became fiat currency. I don't know why the rest of the world didn't rush out and hang him, but they didn't. They just all went along with this. There have been thousands upon thousands upon thousands of fiat currencies throughout history, and there isn't one that survived. It is a 100% failure rate. What we have here, 30 to 40 years, different monetary system, 30 years, 28 years, 39 years plus. What's next? The world is going to have a new monetary system in this decade that we're in. We're going to experience this huge deflationary crash around the world. The world will probably end up on some sort of new monetary system, probably after governments try and print their way out of this and cause hyperinflations of all the currencies, and people will just lose confidence in currency. And what do they always go back to throughout history? Time after time, for the last 5,000 years actually, they always go back to gold and silver. The 7 stages of empire, just as a reminder, started with sound money, and then a country adds layers of public works and social programs, and then develops a massive military, and then puts that military to use. And to pay for the war, it debases its currency supply, which causes a loss of faith in the currency, which then leads to a currency crisis, and gold does an accounting of the expansion of that fiat currency supply that happened over all those years of the first 5 stages. We are in the 6th and beginning the 7th stage. Gold started the accounting in the year 2001, but we're still in the very early stages of this.
Well, that's right. I think one of the problems with gold is people just don't understand it. I mean, for one thing, it's sort of been banished from the curriculum for 35 years. We have going on 2 generations of academics and scholars who have never studied gold. Bright young economics students just don't understand gold. They think it's a joke, or they think it's maybe a commodity trade or a momentum trade. They don't understand that it really is money par excellence.
So now we've learned that money was born in roughly 630 BC when it became fungible. It was free markets and sound money that led to Athens' great prosperity. But debasement of their money for deficit spending on war and public works played a large role in their demise. Over the past 140 years, we've debased our own currencies to the point where 2 generations of scholars don't even understand gold. We learned about Gresham's law and that bad money drives out good. In recent history, there has been a new monetary system roughly every 40 years. And we've learned that we are in the 6th stage of the 7 stages of empire. Never in human history have so many been plundered by so few, and it's all accomplished through this, the biggest scam in the history of mankind.
They say that money doesn't grow on trees, but the truth is that the modern banking system creates currency far faster than trees can grow. Most people don't have a clue how currency is created. Economists and bankers make it sound so complex that people think they can't understand it. But I'm going to strip our monetary system down to its essence so that you can see the scam behind the curtain and just how it affects you. Every modern society creates currency in pretty much the same way. But since the US dollar is the majority of the world's currency, I'm going to use the United States as our example. It all starts when some politician says, "Vote for me and I'll make sure the government provides you more free stuff than my opponent will." But there's no such thing as a free lunch. So to provide that supposedly free stuff, the politicians vote for the country to spend more than its income. This is called deficit spending. To pay for that deficit spending, the Treasury borrows currency by issuing a bond. So what's a bond? If you think about it, a bond is really nothing but a glorified IOU. It's a pretty piece of paper with numbers printed on it that says, "Loan me $1 trillion today, and I promise over a 10-year period I'm going to pay you back that $1 trillion plus interest." But what you need to understand is that Treasury bonds are our national debt. These glorified IOUs are to be paid back by you and I and our descendants through future taxation. Therefore, when the government issues a bond, it steals prosperity out of the future so that it can spend it today. The Treasury then holds a bond auction, and the world's largest banks show up and compete to buy part of our national debt and make a profit on it by earning interest. You'll notice that as we move through this process, the big banks are there, taking a cut every step of the way. This isn't by chance, as you'll see shortly. Then, through a shell game called open market operations, the banks get to sell some of those bonds to the Federal Reserve at a profit. To pay for the bonds, the Federal Reserve opens up its big old checkbook and writes bad, bogus, counterfeit checks that should bounce because they're drawn on an account that always has a zero balance. There isn't one penny in there. To quote from the Boston Federal Reserve, "When you or I write a check, there must be sufficient funds in our account to cover that check. But when the Federal Reserve writes a check, there is no bank deposit on which that check is drawn. When the Federal Reserve writes a check, it is creating money." The Fed then hands those checks to the banks, and at this point, currency springs into existence. The banks then take that currency and buy more bonds at the next Treasury auction. But what is a check? A check is also an IOU. When you write a check, you're making a note that says, "Here's my IOU for cash. All you have to do is go to the bank and pick it up." Now, it's very, very important that you understand this process because we're going to come back later and show you the devastating effect this has on you. The Treasury issues IOUs, bonds. The banks then buy those IOUs with currency. The Federal Reserve then writes IOUs, checks, and hands them to the banks in exchange for the Treasury's IOUs, the bonds. And currency is created. So what's really happening is the Federal Reserve and the Treasury are just swapping IOUs, using the banks as middlemen, and abracadabra, presto, currency magically springs into existence. This process repeats and repeats over and over again, enriching the banks and indebting the public by raising the national debt. The end result is that there's a buildup of bonds at the Federal Reserve and currency at the Treasury. This process is also where all paper currency comes from. The Federal Reserve and the government mistakenly call it base money because they didn't watch episode 1 of this series and they don't know the difference between money and currency. But I will correctly refer to it as base currency because it is not money. It is currency, and as we've learned, there is a big difference. Money has to be a store of value and maintain its purchasing power over long periods of time. We learned in episode 1 that earlier in our history, our paper currency was just a claim check. It was a representation for real money of intrinsic value, the gold and silver that was held on deposit at the Treasury. You could walk into any bank and slap your currency, like say a $20 bill, on the counter and redeem it for real money, a $20 gold piece. But now, this base currency that's piling up back here is really nothing but a receipt or a claim check on an IOU, that bond. So it's really nothing but a supply of numbers. The Treasury then deposits the newly created currency into the various branches of the government, and the politicians say, "Hey, thanks for that." And the government does some deficit spending on public works, social programs, and war. The government employees, contractors, and soldiers then deposit their pay in the banks. Now, this may come as a shock to you, but when you deposit your currency with the bank, you're not actually depositing it into an account to be safely held in trust for you. Instead, you're actually loaning the bank your currency, and within certain legal limits, they can do with it pretty much anything they please. This includes gambling in the stock market and loaning it out, at a profit, of course. Now this is where the machine of currency creation really gets cranking, because this is where something called fractional reserve lending comes into play. Fractional reserve lending is exactly what it says. The banks are allowed to reserve only a fraction of your deposit and loan the rest out. Although reserve ratios may vary, I'm going to use a 10% reserve ratio as our example. If you deposit $100 in your account, the bank can legally take $90 of it and loan it out without telling you. The bank must hold $10 of your deposit in reserve just in case you want some of it. These reserves are called vault cash. But why does your bank account still say you have $100 if the bank has stolen $90 of it? Because the bank left IOUs it created, called bank credit, in its place. Now I know this sounds crazy, but here it is in black and white from the Fed. Commercial banks create checkbook money when they grant a loan simply by adding new deposit dollars in accounts on their books in exchange for a borrower's IOU. These are nothing but numbers that the banks type into their computers. And even though these bank credit IOU numbers are very different from base currency numbers, because they only exist in computers, they are still currency. So now there is $190 in existence. Now, the reason people take out loans from the banks is to buy something. They're going to buy a house or a car or something like that. So the borrower takes the $90 that the bank loaned to him from your account, and he pays the seller of the item. But then the seller deposits that currency into his account, and his bank loans out 90% of that and leaves bank credit numbers in its place. So now there's $271 in existence. This process repeats and repeats until under a 10% reserve ratio, an initial deposit of just $100 can create up to $1,000 of bank credit, all backed by $100 of vault cash, just 10%. But as I said, reserve ratios vary wildly. On some deposits, it's 10%, on others, it's 3%, and on some forms of deposits, reserve requirements are 0. The result is that the expansion of the currency supply by the banks is far greater than even this example would lead you to believe. So once again, when currency is deposited in the banks get to lend it out, and then it gets redeposited and relent, redeposited and relent, redeposited and relent over and over again, creating bank credit all the way. This is where the vast majority of our currency supply comes from. In fact, 92 to 96% of all currency in existence is created not by the government, but here in the banking system. Now, massive amounts of currency spewing into society may at first sound like a fun idea. That is, until you remember one of the most important hidden secrets of money from episode 1, that the prices of everyday goods and services act as a sponge on an expanding currency supply. The more currency we have, the more prices rise. This is where inflation comes from. The true definition of inflation is an expansion of the currency supply. Rising prices are merely the symptom. So our entire currency supply is nothing but a couple of bucks whipped up in this hocus-pocus scam where the Treasury and the Federal Reserve swap glorified IOUs, and a bunch of numbers that the banks just type into their computers. That's it. That's our entire currency supply. It's nothing but a supply of numbers, some of them printed, most of them typed, and there is nothing else. But if you thought that was crazy, get ready to enter the twilight zone of modern economics. We work for some of that currency supply. True wealth is your time, but we trade away moments of our lives, hour by hour, day by day, and year by year, for numbers that somebody printed on pieces of paper or just typed into a computer. Now those numbers represent our blood, sweat, tears, labor, ideas, and talent. We are what gives the currency its value. But here comes the really cruel joke. We work hard so that we can save some of that currency, so that we can pay the tax collector. In the United States, it's known as the IRS. They then turn it over to the Treasury so that the Treasury can pay the principal plus interest on that bond that the Federal Reserve bought with a check drawn on an account that has nothing in it. Now let's do a recap on this section, because this is where the system begins to rob you and I on a massive scale. Much of our taxes are not used for schools, roads, and public services, but to pay interest on bonds that the Federal Reserve bought with a check drawn on an account that has nothing in it. The Federal Reserve is committing fraud. But here's one of the biggest secrets of them all. Before the establishment of the Federal Reserve, there was no need for personal income tax. The Federal Reserve was created in 1913, and that very same year, the Constitution was amended to allow income tax. Do you really think this was just a coincidence? Ask yourself how much income tax you've paid over your lifetime. Much of it has been silently siphoned away into the hands of those who own the system. Yes, this system has owners. Who they are is an even bigger secret that we'll get to shortly. But first, we need to understand the mumbo-jumbo of the so-called debt ceiling. It's all based on a huge paradox. There was interest due on that bond, and there was interest due on every one of those loans that the banks made. That means that there is interest due on every dollar in existence. Let me ask you something. If you borrow the very first dollar into existence, and that's the only dollar that exists on the planet, but you promise to pay it back plus another dollar's worth of interest, where do you get the second dollar to pay the interest? The answer is that you have to borrow that one into existence and promise to pay it back with interest as well. So now there are $2 in existence, but you owe $4, and so on and so on. The result is there's never enough currency to pay the debt. There is always more debt in the system than there is currency in existence to pay the debt. Therefore, the whole system is impossible. It is finite. It will come to an end one day. What would happen if the government stopped borrowing to do deficit spending? Are the payments on those treasury bonds going to stop? What would happen if the public stopped borrowing and going deeper into debt? Are your house and car payments going to stop? No. There is a payment due every month on the principal plus the interest on every dollar in existence, and those payments do not stop. If we stop borrowing, then no new currency is created to replace the currency that we used to make those payments. Whether you're making a payment on a loan or paying tax to make a payment on a bond, the portion of the payment that goes to pay off the principal extinguishes that portion of the debt. But the debt also extinguishes the currency. Currency and debt are like matter and antimatter. When they meet, they annihilate each other. If we just pay off the principal only on all the loans and bonds that exist, the entire currency supply just vanishes. So if we don't go deeper into debt every year, look what happens. The whole thing goes into a deflationary collapse under the weight of those payments. Politicians and pundits alike talk about balancing the budget, paying down the debt, and living within our means. They don't understand that that is deflationary. It is impossible to do under our current monetary system without collapsing the whole economy. This is why any talk of a debt ceiling is not only ridiculous, it's delusional. The system is designed to require ever-increasing levels of debt just to continue. And that's why politicians will always kick the can down the road and raise this so-called debt ceiling over and over again until the whole system finally collapses under its own weight. In other words, they don't want it to collapse on their watch. The Founding Fathers of the United States knew the dangers of central banking and fought to free themselves from this very thing. The Revolutionary War started out as a tax revolt, but now we must pay tax just to have a monetary system. Having just suffered through the hyperinflation of the continental dollar, which was printed into oblivion to finance the Revolutionary War, they understood the dangers of fiat currency and debt-based monetary systems. So to protect future generations from institutional theft and out-of-control government, they wrote into the Constitution that only gold and silver can be money for the simple fact that you can't print them. Our current system is not only unconstitutional, but it robs us of the liberty and prosperity our forefathers fought and died for. We are all feeling the effects of ignoring the Constitution right now. By forcing more currency into circulation, our purchasing power is diluted. Inflation is a slow and insidious stealth tax that is simply the result of this debt-based monetary system. This system empowers and benefits those who create the currency and receive it first, as they get to spend it into circulation before it has an effect on the economy. They're stealing purchasing power from you and transferring it to the banks and the government every hour of every day because of this false monetary system. And it's not like the people at the top don't know this. To quote the Federal Reserve, the decrease in purchasing power incurred by the holders of money due to inflation imparts gains to the issuers of money. This is a fraud. It is a pyramid scheme, it is a Ponzi scheme, it's a scam, and it's a lie. Our entire monetary system is nothing but a form of legalized theft. But here's the biggest con job of them all. The Federal Reserve is not federal, it has stockholders. There is no federal agency that has stockholders. What's a stockholder? A share of stock represents a percentage of ownership in a corporation. So the stockholders are the owners of that corporation. Therefore, the Federal Reserve is a private corporation with owners. And you can see it for yourself if you go to the Federal Reserve's website, and it will say, the stockholders receive an annual dividend of 6%. Now we know that the stock in the Federal Reserve was originally issued to the largest banks in the United States. But because of mergers and acquisitions through the years, you can't actually trace who owns the stock in the Federal Reserve. That's a very closely guarded secret. My guess would be that the owners are those primary dealers, the banks that get to make a profit by selling part of our national debt, those bonds, to the Federal Reserve, who buys them with a check from nothing. Then we pay tax to pay the principal and the interest on those bonds so that the Federal Reserve can pay the banks a 6% dividend. Don't be alarmed if you don't quite comprehend the deception of this system at first glance. Very few people do. It is purposely complex. The economist John Maynard Keynes once wrote, "By this means, government may secretly and unobserved confiscate the wealth of the people, and not one man in a million will detect the theft." I believe that presented correctly, anyone can understand this system, regardless of how complex it is. So let's do a recap and break it down even more. The way the system works is that, step 1, the government creates glorified IOUs. These bonds increase our national debt and put the public on the hook to pay it back. Step 2, IOUs are swapped to create currency. The Treasury sells the bonds to the banks. The banks then turn around and sell our national debt at a profit to the Federal Reserve, which they probably own. The Federal Reserve then opens its checkbook that doesn't have a penny in it and buys those IOUs with IOUs that it writes, checks, on a checking account that has a zero balance. Then they give those checks to the banks and currency just springs into existence. And then the whole process repeats. This results in a buildup of bonds at the Federal Reserve and currency at the Treasury, which is really just a supply of numbers. The Treasury then deposits the numbers in the various branches of the government, and we get to step 3. The government spends the numbers on promises, public works, social programs, and war. Then the government employees, contractors, and soldiers deposit their pay into the banks, and we get to step 4, where the banks multiply the numbers by magically inventing more IOUs through fractional reserve lending, where they steal a portion of everyone's deposit and lend it out. That currency gets redeposited, and then a portion is stolen again, and the process repeats over and over, magnifying the currency supply exponentially. Then we work for some of those numbers, which brings us to step 5, where our numbers are taxed. We pay tax to the IRS, who then turns our numbers over to the Treasury, so the Treasury can pay the principal plus the interest on bonds that were purchased by the Federal Reserve with a check from nothing. Then we get to step 6, the debt ceiling delusion. The system is designed to require ever-increasing levels of debt and will eventually collapse under its own weight because politicians always kick the can down the road. They don't want it to collapse on their watch. And finally, step 7. The secret owners take their cut. The world's largest banks own the Federal Reserve. Those banks make a profit selling our national debt to the Fed. They make a profit when the Fed pays them interest on the reserves held at the Fed, and the Fed pays them a 6% dividend on their ownership of the Fed. This system is fundamentally evil. It funnels wealth from the working population to the government and the banking sector. It is the cause of the artificial booms and busts of modern economies, and it causes great disparity of wealth between the rich and the working class. And it is only possible because we no longer use real money, we use currency. But worst of all, it is a form of enslavement. Bond is the root word of bondage. Whenever a government issues a bond, it is a promise to make us pay tax in the future. Nobody asked you if you wanted to pay tax today for the prosperity we all enjoyed in the last century. Nobody is asking our children if they want to work hard in the future to pay for the prosperity we're enjoying now. George Washington once wrote to James Madison, "No generation has the right to contract debts greater than can be paid off during the course of its own existence." By stealing prosperity from tomorrow so we can spend it today, we enslave ourselves and future generations. Now this all sounds pretty bad, but there is great hope, for you are the greatest threat to this false monetary system. This system relies on the public being ignorant of its workings. Please share this knowledge with everyone you know, because an informed public that fully understands the system can build a better future for generations to come. And now I leave you with this quote, widely attributed to a former director of the Bank of England. The modern banking system manufactures money out of nothing. The process is perhaps the most astounding piece of sleight of hand that was ever invented. Banking was conceived in inequity and born in sin. Bankers own the earth. Take it away from them, but leave them the power to create money and control credit, and with the flick of a pen, they will create enough money to buy it back again. But if you want to continue as the slaves of bankers and pay the cost of your own slavery, let them continue to create money and to control credit. This is the Federal Reserve in Washington, D.C. It's located on Constitution Street, and that is just as much of a joke as the New York Fed being located on Liberty Street. Both of them are unconstitutional, both of them limit our liberty, and they transfer wealth away from us every second of every day to the Federal Reserve, to the government, and to the banking sector. You are now among the 1 in a million who can detect the theft of your prosperity. So the big question is, what can you do about it? 1. Watch this video until you can describe and teach it to others. Those who understand this system can make preparations for its unavoidable collapse and protect themselves. History shows that those who don't will probably be wiped out. 2. Share this video with everyone, especially those you care about. In educating ourselves and each other, we can prevent the further loss of our freedoms and maybe, just maybe, win some of them back. The entire world is facing a debt-driven disaster, the scale of which has never been seen before in human history. The situation is now so severe that we're left with only 2 options: default on our debt or inflate it away. You can already hear people blaming the free markets and even money itself for our problems, and to me this is just tragic, because we don't have free markets anymore, and we certainly don't use real money. This is the real reason for our problems. Our money itself has been corrupted. It's not just an issue of economics. This affects your freedom. When this crisis hits, people will be screaming for the government to do something when it was the government that caused the problems in the first place. Many societies have faced this dilemma in the past, and we can learn what the outcomes might be simply by studying what they did and comparing it to what we're doing today. This is one of the best museums I have ever seen. Right at the very beginning of the museum, you walk in and it starts with barter. You know, originally, the first form of currency was livestock. The problem with livestock, though, like for instance this cow, if I traded this cow to you for something and somebody else wants to trade you something else that's of much lower value, you can't make change. A system that relies on barter is very inefficient because you not only suffer from the problems of divisibility, you also rely on the hope that you will find someone who has a good or service that you need, who wants something that you have at the same place and at the same time. In economics, this is called the coincidence of wants. Now add the fact that most goods have a shelf life before they perish, and you can see why barter systems held mankind back for so long. So what was it that solved the coincidence of wants and propelled us out of the Stone Age and into space? It was the invention of money. Money is not evil. It is a magnificent tool that allows us to trade our specialized skills and to store our economic energy. Without it, we'd be struggling to feed ourselves each day, and our average lifespan would still be 30. In episode 1, we learned that real money has to fulfill certain properties in order to function. But 2,600 years after its emergence, people still confuse money with currency, even the so-called experts. So they've got here some of the things about what money is. The first example here is, money is whatever goes. So, in earlier cultures, commodities such as cattle, stones, or metals were used as money. Buyers took the value of the goods on trust when making their purchase. Today, too, money is a question of confidence. So, the currency, today isn't money, today we're using currency, but the only reason it has any purchasing power whatsoever is because yesterday your experience was that it purchased something. So you have faith that it's going to purchase something tomorrow. Otherwise, it has no value. Whatever form it takes, reliable money has two characteristics. It is genuine and it is stable. People can rely on its value. Well, you know, what fiat currency around the planet has maintained its value? They all fall in value. So right away you can see the difference. They're talking about currency here. And when they say it's genuine, I mean, what is genuine? A counterfeiter, somebody that's running their own printing press in their basement, is making genuine notes as far as he's concerned. I mean, they're genuine counterfeits. These things that just come off of a printing press, well, yeah, it's a genuine lie from a central bank or a government that you've got something that's going to store value for you, because it doesn't over long periods of time. It loses value. Gold, banknotes, and electronic money, meaning electronic currency, may be stored, divided up, or transported. As its material value has declined over time, its genuineness has had to be beyond question. Well, this one says that it's got to maintain its value, and right here they're contradicting the next one. The one thing here, gold, is the only thing that they're talking about that has not lost its value. In the past, rare goods were used as money. Today, central banks must ensure that the supply of money is restricted. Well, what are they doing all over the planet today? They're lifting all the restrictions on how much currency they're creating. They're flooding the planet with currency. The next display shows the usual museum pieces that are described as commodity money: cowrie shells, representative axes, cocoa beans, and the like. While these work better than barter, none of them were actually money because they all had a weakness: one or more properties of money that they couldn't fulfill. Therefore, they are commodity currencies, not money. Some of these were widely used right up until the beginning of the 20th century, and there's some stuff here that I haven't seen before. Here's something very interesting. This brick of tea, its value is in the intrinsic, it's in the commodity that you're using, it's the tea. But this one has a certain fungibility to it. Each unit would have the same value, and you can make change. You can snap these things apart into units of 6. It's portable. It's not that heavy. This fulfills quite a few of the functions of money. I would not imagine that it's that durable. It probably doesn't wear that well. And now we come to the emergence of real money. Here we have little pieces of metal, just little pieces that have been broken off of bars or something that was cast, other little blobs of metal that were traded as a currency. You know, they had purchasing power, they had an intrinsic value, but they still weren't fungible, which means interchangeable. Every one of them had a different value. You can see that some of them have a higher silver content, some of them have a higher gold content. These are called electrum. It's a mixture of gold and silver, naturally occurring. What you notice is that this is from the 7th century BC, and then between the 7th and the 6th century, we're talking about somewhere between 680 and 630 BC, the emergence of true money. Here we've got 4 coins. The large one is a 1/3 stater coin, and the other 3 are 1/6 stater coins. Each unit is interchangeable. It's now a unit of account. You can take so many of these in trade for so many of loaves of bread, and you don't have to break out your little scale and weigh them any longer. With the little chunks of metal, you had to weigh every transaction that was going on. You had to weigh whatever your payment was and then take a guess as to what the purity was. Here you have some standards that were set by mints and guaranteed by those mints. These are a unit of account. They're fungible. Every one of them is interchangeable. They're portable, they're durable in your pocket over long periods of time. They're divisible, you can make change. You can see there's a 1/3 stater and 1/6 staters. And they're a store of value over long periods of time. These still have purchasing power today, 2,600 years after they were made. Another thing that I find really interesting is between maybe 680 BC and 300 BC, cultures all around the world, they all gravitated toward gold and silver coinage as money. The entire world sort of decided all together that gold and silver were money. Why? Because the free markets keep on selecting gold and silver as money because of the properties that it has.
So, the day of reckoning will come when millions of baby boomers reach the age where they have to take mandatory distributions from their IRAs. As they find that the investments they were counting on for their retirement, their homes and their IRAs full of mutual funds, have actually lost value, that the amount of stuff that they can buy from the proceeds if they sell their home is actually less than when they bought their home. And as they realize that their dream of a comfortable retirement was just that, a dream, all those boomers will get scared and pull in their horns. They will stop spending. They will start selling off their assets, and the greatest stock market crash in history will unfold as more and more boomers panic and sell. I believe this will also be accompanied by the greatest real estate crash the world has ever known. This perfect storm of bankruptcies and foreclosures will cause the currency supply to contract as the giant credit bubble pops, and all those big spenders become big savers. When people save their currency, it stops circulating. The economic engine runs out of oil, and the whole thing locks up. This is every central banker's worst nightmare. This is real deflation, and the world's central bankers are about to discover the true scale of the horrors of a credit bubble implosion. When this happens, the Federal Reserve will once again send out its armada of money bomb dropping helicopters, but this time something will be different. Something will have gone horribly wrong. The bombs will have been defused. The Fed will try pumping the banking sector by buying up every kind of debt they can get their hands on, but to no avail. They will go to the extraordinary measures that they had said they were prepared to go to. They will buy every mortgage, mortgage-backed security, and any other type of debt that panicky investors and banks are trying to sell, but nothing good will come of it. They will start buying stocks to buoy the stock market, but retail sales will continue to plunge. They will try broad-based tax cuts, but it won't jumpstart the economy. They will work with foreign central banks to buy each other's debt, but the global economy will continue to plummet. People will finally see through the veil. They will see what Dorothy, the Scarecrow, the Lion, and the Tin Man saw, that the Wizard of Oz is really just some dopey old guy frantically pulling levers. Remember when we talked about how during World War I, the Germans increased their currency supply by 400%, yet there was no price inflation because of the public's anxiety over the war and the uncertainty of their future? Imagine the anxiety 75 million baby boomers will feel as they approach retirement, only to find their homes and their mutual funds are now worth next to nothing. The nest egg, ladies and gentlemen, has just cracked. When they get their tax rebates, are they going to buy that new big screen TV and the latest cell phone? I think not. I think they're going to save every dime they can get their hands on, just like in Germany during the war. But there will be a point at which a threshold is reached. For each income class it will be different. It will be the point where they feel that they've finally got enough saved for retirement. For some it will be $100,000, for others it will be $1 million, and for others still it will be $10 million. The Fed knows there is a point where they'll finally feel safe enough to replace that aging computer and maybe get that new TV. At this point, the boys at the Fed will buy enough government debt to fund tax rebates for all the taxes in the previous year, but still, nobody will buy that new car. The threshold the Fed is looking for will not be reached. Then, in not-so-quiet desperation, the Fed will say, "Screw the helicopters, send in the bombers." And as the shadow of millions of stealth currency bombers darken the skies, currency will begin to fall like rain in the desert. As Joe Sixpack and John Q get tax rebate checks in the mail for all the taxes they paid during their entire lifetimes, fear will be temporarily alleviated, and some of that currency will come out of hiding, just as in Weimar Germany. Prices will rise quickly and dramatically as all that stored up currency energy is released. In a panic, the Fed will call back the bombers, but it will be too late. There's nothing they will be able to do to stop it now because the hyperinflation will have already begun. The Dow will begin an invisible crash of epic proportions, and gold prices will shoot to the moon. If you are wise enough to moor your boat in the safe harbors of gold and silver and other commodities, you will weather the storm. It won't be pretty, but at least you'll be safe. At this point, confidence in the currency will fall faster than it can be created. Cost of living increases for government employees, and the costs of all government projects, the subcontractors, the labor, the materials, will all skyrocket. And each time more currency is created to pay for the increases, the value of the currency will fall even faster. In times like that, governments have only two choices: shut down the government and all of its projects and services, send everybody home without pay, turn off the printing presses, and wait for the free market system to discover price levels that account for the quantity of the currency in the supply, or print the currency into oblivion. Governments have always chosen the latter. But the stored up energy of excess currency creation doesn't have to take place within the United States, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in the future. In fact, there is an abundance of stored up currency just waiting to be released right now. As I mentioned earlier, all the dollars we sent overseas to other countries to buy their goods and services are now sitting in their bank accounts, just waiting to be spent. Eventually, the world economy will lose faith in the US dollar and will want to dump it by buying up goods. And as all those dollars come flooding back into the US, it will, of course, cause the prices of those goods and services to rise, and could, and probably will, trigger a scenario much like the one I have just finished describing. Today, mankind stands at a crossroads, and the path that humanity chooses may have a greater impact on our freedom and prosperity than any event in history. In 2008, a new technology was introduced that is so important that its destiny and the destiny of mankind are inextricably interlinked. It is so powerful that if captured and controlled, it could enslave all of humanity. But if allowed to remain free and flourish, it could foster unimaginable levels of peace and prosperity. It has the power to replace all financial systems globally, to supplant 90% of Wall Street, and to provide some functions of government. It has no agenda. It's always fair and impartial. It cannot be manipulated, subverted, corrupted, or cheated. And it inverts the power structure and places control of one's destiny in the hands of the individual. In the future, when we look back at the 2.6 million year timeline of human development and the major turning points that led to modern civilization, the creation of farming, the domestication of animals, the invention of the wheel, the harnessing of electricity, and the splitting of the atom, the 60-year development of computers, the internet, and this new technology will be looked upon as a single event, a turning point that will change the course of human history. It's called Full Consensus Distributed Ledger Technology, and so far, its major use has been for cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin, but its potential goes far, far beyond that. We need to go right back to the beginning and learn how Bitcoin works. At first, I found the whole thing to be very abstract and complicated, but now I've found a way of breaking it down so that you don't have to be a rocket scientist to get it. I'm going to explain it by using an ancient problem that Bitcoin claims to have solved. It's called the Byzantine General's Problem, and until now, it's been unsolvable. The problem goes like this. How do you make absolutely sure that multiple entities which are separated by distance are in absolute full agreement before an action is taken? In other words, how can individual parties find a way to guarantee full consensus? Here's the example. Imagine that you are a general in the Byzantine army and you're planning to attack an enemy city. You have the city surrounded by several battalions, each of them camped several miles from the other, and each of them led by another general. A coordinated attack on the city from all sides at the same time will be successful, but an uncoordinated attack will likely end in defeat. You have decided to attack at dawn, but you have no walkie-talkies or cell phones, and signals from flags, torches, or smoke could be seen by the enemy. How do you make sure with absolute certainty that all of the other generals reach consensus and all attack together at dawn? You could send messengers on horseback, but what if one of them is captured or killed before delivering the message? You would need to have a reply from each of your generals confirming that they have received your message, which means that they would have to send messengers to you on horseback, but what if they are captured or killed? What if a messenger is captured by the enemy and an imposter messenger with a fake reply is sent back to you? And how do the other generals know that the messages that they received from you are genuine and haven't been intercepted and altered by the enemy? Worse yet, what if some of the other generals are traitors and they send messages back to you confirming that they will attack at dawn when their true intention is to retreat? How can you ever be absolutely certain that all of your battalions will reach consensus and attack simultaneously? Like I said, this problem has remained unsolved for thousands of years, and at its core, it's all about individual parties being able to trust each other directly, no strings attached. Bitcoin claims to have conquered this problem. Now imagine that the battalions are actually computers on a network, and that the generals are copies of a computer program running a ledger. A ledger that, via some very complex math, records transactions and events in the exact order that they happened. The key here is that all of these ledgers are exactly the same for everyone. As soon as a change is made on one copy of a ledger, if it is proven to be true by the math, all other copies of the ledger are updated to match. What we have here is a distributed ledger that is also always in consensus. This is one of the first things to understand about Bitcoin. It is the first full consensus distributed ledger mankind has ever seen. This network can be expanded across the entire planet. It means that individual parties on opposite sides of the world can come to consensus on an event without requiring any third party as an intermediary for trust. Whether it's an order from a general to his troops or an order from you for a pizza, a distributed ledger confirms via math whether an event is true and records it permanently. Bitcoin, the first full consensus distributed ledger, is a trust machine. But is it 100% reliable? That's a question for later in the episode. But for now, where did Bitcoin come from and who invented it?
Well, Bitcoin was originally developed by a pseudonymous developer, Satoshi Nakamoto. There's a lot of speculation about who he is, and frankly, I work directly with him, but I have no idea. But that never really worried me because Bitcoin itself is open source. And so any engineer can evaluate the Bitcoin source code, evaluate the Bitcoin cryptography, and understand and trust the software. So you don't have to trust who wrote it, you trust the software itself. And so that was one of the big reasons why Satoshi chose open source for Bitcoin, is so you can have trust in the system. You don't have to trust who he is.
It's completely independent of its creator. And if we didn't know who invented the electric motor or the radio or any of these core technology developments, electricity, so what? They still work. You don't have to have any appeal to authority. Now, in a centralized system where someone is in control, it matters who is behind the curtains. It really matters who is in control. It matters who invented it because they remain in control, or they might have a secret way of controlling it. Bitcoin is wide open and no one is in control, and everyone can see exactly how it works.
So how does it work and what's the point? Cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin allow people to transact with each other using the internet anywhere on Earth. Instead of having an account number like a checking account or a credit card, cryptocurrencies are much more secure because they have a public key and a private key. It's like having two account numbers, one for deposits and another for withdrawals. You'll often see them displayed as a string of characters or a scannable code. This level of security means that you could put your public key on a billboard if you wanted to, and your funds would still be secure. The only thing other people can do with your public key is send funds to you. It's your private key that gives you access to your funds. As long as you keep control of your private key, your funds are absolutely safe and theft and fraud are virtually impossible. But, just like cash in your wallet, you need to keep it safe to prevent it from being stolen. Its security is entirely your responsibility. Cryptocurrencies can also give you privacy. Just like cash, you don't have to disclose any personal information when you spend them. By contrast, a credit card has your name, account number, and expiration date. These act like a public key, but the equivalent of your private key, your signature and security code, are displayed in plain sight. This is just plain stupid. I've toured 5 national money museums, and while I was at one of them, I saw a group of young students on a school outing. I can just imagine that someday in the future, a group of kids will be standing around the credit card display, pointing and laughing at the incredible stupidity of the system we once used. And this is the point. Cryptocurrencies are light years ahead of our current technology. Since Bitcoin was the first cryptocurrency, I'm going to use it as our example, and I'll expand on our earlier description of a distributed ledger. But first, where does Bitcoin get its value? Bitcoin is brand new to mankind in that it's both a currency and a payment network simultaneously. And this is where Bitcoin gets its value. The immense network of computers all around the world running the Bitcoin distributed ledger. Every second of every day, these computers are keeping the ledger updated and in full consensus via a system that incentivizes them to process and confirm transactions. The system that Bitcoin runs on is called blockchain. Think of it as a modern version of an old-fashioned bookkeeping ledger, but instead of a handwritten list of entries and calculations, a blockchain is a digital list of entries and calculations. A block is simply a bundle of transactions. Think of a block as a whole page of transactions in the old-fashioned ledger. A blockchain is just a chain of blocks. It's the same as a whole series of pages in the old-fashioned ledger. Easy, huh? Here's how it works. The Bitcoin blockchain actually exists in every one of the millions of computers on the network as exact copies of each other. However, for this example, so that we can zoom in and you can really see just how a blockchain works, I'm going to show it as one giant blockchain in the middle of a small network of computers. Let's follow a pizza transaction with Bitcoin. When the transaction occurs, it first appears on the network in a pool of unconfirmed transactions, along with thousands of others from all around the world. Millions of different computers from the network then gather some of these transactions and place them in their own blocks. The computers are all creating blocks constantly in the hope that theirs will be the next one added to the official chain. A new block is added to the chain every 10 minutes or so, when one of the computers wins the right to have its block recognized as the next in the chain and is rewarded with a prize of newly created bitcoins. The way a computer wins the prize is by trying to guess the answer to an extremely difficult math problem. In fact, the problem is so difficult that even with millions of computers making guesses billions or even trillions of times per second, it still takes roughly 10 minutes to find the answer. Once one of the computers guesses the correct answer and wins, all of the millions of computers on the network that did not win are instructed to throw away all the work they have done, update their ledgers with the block from the winning computer, and start again with a new math problem. In doing so, the computers use an immense amount of power and cost a literal fortune to run. So why do they do it? Because it can be very profitable. This is where the term mining for bitcoins comes from. Instead of striking gold by mining for precious metals in the wilderness, these computers are hoping to strike Bitcoin by mining precious numbers on the blockchain. But when these millions of computers are selecting transactions to go into their blocks, they aren't all selecting the same transactions, and not all the blocks are the same size. Some contain more transactions, some contain less. When blocks are thrown away, the transactions they contain go back into the pool of unconfirmed transactions. This means that the probability of a transaction being confirmed and staying in the order it was confirmed in is not absolute, but it becomes more of a certainty every 10 minutes as new blocks are added. In fact, for very large transactions, it's suggested that you wait for 6 or more blocks, about 60 minutes, to be absolutely certain that a payment is permanent. So why is it so slow? Why is your pizza cold before you own it? Interestingly, the system is slowed down on purpose, and here's why. With the insane difficulty of guessing the answer to the math problem, you would think that the odds of 2 or more computers winning at the same time are extremely improbable, but it actually happens quite often. This is called a soft fork, and when it occurs, all the computers in the network receive both of the winning blocks and are instructed to create a new block that will chain to the block they received first. But because of varying internet connection speeds, different computers receive different winning blocks at different times. The tie is broken roughly 10 minutes later when one of the computers solves the new math problem and its block is added to the ledger, and the longest chain wins. But what happens to all of the blocks on the other side of the fork? They're discarded, along with all the transactions they contained, which go back into the pool of unconfirmed transactions. This soft forking is the main reason the system must be slowed down on purpose via the math problem. If the system was instant, it would be forking everywhere, all the time, and there would be no consensus. No one would have any idea of which ledger was the correct one, and every computer would be busy building a different block to create yet another fork. The slowness and immense amount of computing power is required to keep the Bitcoin ledger in full consensus. Therefore, as more and more computing power is added to the network, the system automatically adjusts to increase the difficulty of solving the math problem, which then requires even more power. If Bitcoin is ever going to be widely used, it will be using a massive amount of the world's energy. There are other systems for reaching consensus, but we'll look at those later in the episode. For now, Bitcoin is working as intended and allows people to transact with each other using the internet anywhere on Earth. Bitcoin, it's the first full consensus distributed ledger that mankind has ever seen, but it's not the last.
A lot of people don't know this, but the Revolutionary War was a war fought to free themselves from regulation, from government intrusion on their lives, from too much taxation. And the founding fathers were fighting for liberty and freedom. And at the end of the war, George Washington was in control of the armies of this continent and could have crowned himself emperor, but instead chose to resign his commission and retire to private life, giving us this gift of a free republic. One of the things that I'm getting from this conference is that a lot of them are worried about regulation. And so it's this same revolution being fought all over again. They're worried about regulation. They can't actually stop transactions with cryptocurrencies, but they could come and try and punish us afterwards and make it less likely to be used. And this is a tool that could free humanity. It's an amazing leap in technology, an amazing leap in the potential evolution of mankind. And so if this battle is lost and governments do succeed in trying to regulate the cryptocurrencies, it would be like losing the Revolutionary War. This stands for everything that the Founding Fathers stood for: the belief in freedom, liberty, and the individual choice and responsibility for your own actions.
This is kind of an amazing thing because it's essentially immortal. It can exist in trillions of copies all over the world. What that means essentially is that it can't be destroyed. I mean, you could apply every regulator, every bureaucrat, every politician, every central banker in the world, assign it to destroy the blockchain, and they could spend 24/7 doing this, smashing copy after copy after copy, and destroy trillions of copies. But so long as there's one left somewhere, and there always will be, it can reproduce itself instantly and come into existence of billions and trillions of times over again, virtually instantly. What this means is that the blockchain itself is more powerful than all the governments in the world combined many times over. This is huge. We've never had a tool this powerful to beat back the despots of the world.
Throughout most of the convention, I couldn't find anybody that shared a few of the concerns that I have about Bitcoin, such as being a deflationary currency. That was until I met Chris Ellis. Chris, tell me about the concerns that you have.
Bitcoin right now is still an experiment, as are most cryptocurrencies, and the price is mostly supported by a speculative sentiment. And that's because markets are forward pricing mechanisms. People are looking at the information and they're buying on the basis of what they believe other people will do in the future with that information. And I think that a lot of people, having spoken to a lot of merchants as well, they are telling me anecdotally that people are not spending their Bitcoins. So I am concerned. I think the economic side of Bitcoin is probably the weakest. That's why we need a lot of these alternative cryptocurrencies to play around with some of the parameters. But we should consider this an experiment for now.
One of my concerns is that your currency is going to be worth more tomorrow than it is today. And so people have a tendency to hoard currency in a deflation, like the Great Depression, for instance. Bitcoin is going to have so many coins per month released, and then that level drops every year or 4 years?
4 years, yeah.
Until it gets to a level where it reaches 21 million coins and it stops.
Yes.
When it stops, I have two concerns. One, the Bitcoin mining that people are doing is what encourages them to leave computers running all over the planet, and that's what makes Bitcoin work. Now, I know there's a small transaction fee, and if velocity, the number of transactions, picks up enough, then the transaction fee is a reason to leave your computer on. But you have a deflationary currency that encourages hoarding and not spending it on transactions. And so when it reaches the 21 million, what is the reward for leaving the computers running if velocity slows and people tend to hoard it and there's no new coins to be mined anymore? So, and plus, the cost of power is probably going to go up in the future.
Yeah.
Have you got any other concerns?
Yeah, one of my concerns in this space is that most people here are communications and marketing. They're in the business of persuading people. And I think we need more developers. We need to inspire younger people. There are probably fewer than 1,000 people on the planet that actually know how to code a cryptocurrency. And that is a huge form of centralization. They become like Congress. And then we have to kind of go to them as lay people who don't know how to code and ask for changes, or otherwise we end up having to fork the code and produce our own one. So I still think there's a lot to do in terms of outreach, getting existing programmers into the Bitcoin space, onto the GitHub repository, so they can start making their own changes and start experimenting and learning as well.
I've learned that this is more than just a digital currency. I thought that this was just for sending value from one person to another. This is a revolution that will change the world. It will tear down borders. It will connect the globe. It is as important as the internet was. But because it connects people, because it frees people, there will come a day where there is a call to regulate it, to stop it, to shut it down possibly. The people that are calling for those things, their motives need to be questioned, because what they are trying to prevent is freedom. It's that simple. One of the things that cryptocurrency does is it provides freedom, and the people that will be calling for its regulation or its abandonment will be the financial sector, central banks, governments, because it provides for a lot of the things that government does very poorly, it will do very well. That the financial system currently does very poorly, it will do well. It's fair, honest, impartial, instant, and cannot be subverted. The only caveats are that Bitcoin has first mover advantage. It's the largest one, but it may not be the one that succeeds. It's an experiment at this point. But the important thing is that the genie is out of the bottle. Freedom is on its way to us right now. We can all support it, or we can let it languish. And I think that this cannot be stopped. So am I going to sell my gold and silver and convert it all to Bitcoin? Absolutely not. Bitcoin, as I said, is an experiment. There is a possibility that these things could go to zero before they're fully developed. There's a possibility of some sort of catastrophic failure. Right now, it has proved very robust and unhackable. You don't know what is going to happen in the future. So one thing to keep in mind, the Germans came up with the Enigma machine in World War II, and it was supposedly uncrackable. And then we broke the code. And then they added another dial to it to increase the complexity manyfold. And it was supposed to be uncrackable, and we cracked the code. So, Bitcoin has not been completely proven. It's got 5 years of existence now and robustness. This may be the answer to all of mankind's problems when it comes to a simple medium of exchange, but it's more than that. You can make these smart contracts that settle with a set of rules, so somebody doesn't get paid until all of the rules that you have established are fulfilled. You can create escrow with yourself, where there's a third party that has to sign off that a transaction has been completed before the payment goes through. They're working on things where you can take delivery of something continuously and pay for it as you use it. It would be like paying for the internet for every second that you're using it only, or paying for the gas that's delivered to your house. Instead of monthly, you're being billed per thermal unit, and with no frictional costs involved. So this adds up to efficiency. Therefore, mankind is left over with more prosperity. If there's no third party in between bleeding off economic energy, you end up with more prosperity. This is a very good thing for all of us. And because it is so fair and impartial, there's less of a need for the court system. There's less need for government and rules and regulation and people to enforce all of this stuff. In the future, there will be less need for Wall Street. That Wall Street does not realize it yet, but they are antiquated dinosaurs of the past about to go extinct. You can attach stocks and bonds and things such as that to cryptocurrencies, and companies could now do IPOs just on the internet. They do not need Wall Street anymore. They don't need a third party like Goldman Sachs or some other big brokerage house taking a cut. There's no need to worry about corruption because the code cannot be corrupted. I do know that I am going to be putting some of my capital into cryptocurrencies from now on and supporting this movement and helping to push the freedom of mankind forward. And here's something else. The reason that people buy Bitcoin is the same reason that people buy gold and silver. It's an alternative to all of the other currencies, the fiat currencies that are being printed into oblivion on this planet right now, and they eliminate the need for third-party trust. You don't have to trust somebody else with your Bitcoins. You only have to trust yourself. You don't have to trust somebody else with your gold and silver. You have to trust yourself. So the reasons are the same, and so I would encourage every precious metals investor to investigate Bitcoin and the other cryptocurrencies, and I would encourage every Bitcoin and cryptocurrency user and investor to investigate precious metals. I'm going to hold both. I look at the cryptocurrencies as a very speculative, volatile, and potentially risky play. I look at gold and silver just like savings. I see them as something that has never failed in 5,000 years. They are proven, and I see them as extremely undervalued compared to the morass of fiat currencies on this planet at this point. If the founding fathers of America were standing here beside me, they would be fighting for this revolution.
Because of its rate of growth, Bitcoin has been stressed to the limits. Where it was once fast and cheap, it is now slow and expensive. In fact, the issues Bitcoin has suffered from have led to political infighting, Bitcoin forking into multiple versions, and alternative cryptocurrencies gaining market share every day. Distributed ledger technology has caught fire, and there's a speculative mania occurring. While the speculation can't go on forever, one thing is for sure: blockchain is here to stay. Or is it? Since the advent of Bitcoin, there have been many thousands of blockchain-based cryptocurrencies created, and now there are more of them being created every single day. So what's different about Hashgraph? Well, it isn't blockchain. It's totally different. In fact, the way it works is a real mind-bender and not very easy for me to explain, but I'm going to give it a try. Instead of a block in a blockchain, Hashgraph calls their packages of information events. Your computer takes a transaction like a payment, or anything else for that matter, such as an action in a video game, an offer to sell merchandise or even sell stocks or bonds, a bid on that item, a contract, or even a law. Pretty much any information or transaction you want to record, and it puts it in the event. For transmitting information quickly, Hashgraph uses a technology that has been the gold standard in computer science for decades. It's super fast, and it's called Gossip Protocol. Your computer randomly tells another computer in the network about the event you've created, and that computer responds by telling your computer about any events it heard about. Then that computer tells another computer about your event and the other events it heard about, and the computer it's talking to responds by telling all the events it knows about. It's absolutely the best, most efficient way to spread information, and it's exponentially fast. But here's the twist. Each time a computer tells another computer about an event, it also includes the information of the time it heard it and who it heard it from, and the time they heard it and who they heard it from, and so on and so on. It's called Gossip About Gossip, and it lets everyone know what everyone else knows and exactly when they knew it in just fractions of a second. The other major component is an even older technology, and it's the most robust, secure, and certain way of coming to absolute consensus. It's called voting protocol. But until now, it was so slow that nobody ever used it. And the twist that Hashgraph has given it is that there's no voting. Instead, because everyone already knows what everyone else knows, you can mathematically calculate with 100% certainty how they would vote. It's virtual voting, and it allows Hashgraph to come to consensus almost instantly. So instead of recording things on a block and then adding it to the blockchain once every 10 minutes, Hashgraph events are added to the system instantly the moment they're created, so they don't have 10 minutes worth of information in them. This means that they're small and they contain far less data, so they use very little bandwidth and are much easier to transmit. And because it's not trying to guess the answer to an incredibly complex math problem trillions of times per second, Hashgraph uses just a minuscule amount of power. From what I've seen so far, compared to blockchain, Hashgraph is lightning fast, more secure, and provably fair. All events are time-stamped the moment they're woven into the system, so the record of whose event came first and whose came second is instant, and there's no such thing as soft forking or unconfirmed events. It can also replace huge portions of the internet that are currently run by centralized servers, by replacing them with the shared computing power of all of our own computers, iPads, and cell phones. It looks like Hashgraph might just have the potential of fulfilling all the original hopes and dreams I had for blockchain technology. The power to decentralize and remove the middlemen from commerce, banking, stock markets, and much of the legal system and government. With the speed at which this technology is evolving, the future is looking bright, and Hashgraph is the perfect example of just how fast things are moving in this field.
So one of the challenges I think with any new technology like this is how do you really explain to people, how do you make a compelling case for what makes a technology so compelling, right? And one of the things that's so compelling about this technology is the throughput, it's the speed. And it's you know, you can tell people that they've tested over 300,000 minimum tested transactions per second versus Bitcoin's 3 to 7 max. But like, how do you kind of get that in your head? And I sort of did a back of the envelope calculation, and that's roughly twice the speed of sound relative to a snail's pace, Bitcoin being a snail's pace, and this network literally being like a supersonic jet traveling at twice the speed of sound. Which is, I mean, just wrap your head around that for a second. It's remarkable. It's not even like within, so you can see the difference. It's tremendous. And understanding, of course, that the speed of the network, the reason why Bitcoin is so slow is because they have to make it slow. Because if it's not slow, it would fall apart. It would branch off everywhere. You would never have consensus.
Now remember the explanation of the Byzantine general's problem from earlier and how blockchain was built to solve it? Here's something not many people know. Blockchain systems aren't technically Byzantine fault tolerant. They came close, but no cigar.
It isn't Byzantine fault tolerant. And the reason why it's not Byzantine is because in order to be Byzantine, there has to come a point in time when you've reached consensus, you know you've reached consensus, and you know you'll never be wrong, and you're never going to change your mind. And that doesn't happen with blockchain because of the nature of the network. The geometrical qualities of the blockchain network require you to always sort of recognize that you're never entirely sure. You're probabilistically more confident that you're arriving at consensus, but that's also why on the blockchain network you need to keep an entire history of the ledger, because you sort of have to have the capacity to do a forensic analysis in the event that you are mistaken, in the event that the network has forked and you don't know it. That's something that you don't have to do with Hashgraph, because with Hashgraph, you're coming to consensus every few seconds, and you can dump the entire history of the network's data and just keep rolling forward because you're absolutely sure that you reached consensus. And that's the difference. While everyone was really busy building apps, they forgot about what the core of distributed technology is all about, which is reaching consensus. And what Hashgraph has done is it has revolutionized that process. We can agree about the things that we're communicating about at scale, and that's a revolution. It's the biggest revolution since the web.
Bitcoin, once it started to scale up, it turned out that it used an immense amount of energy to run the system. And also, as it scaled up, it became slower and slower and slower to where it was no longer a currency. It was basically a speculative vehicle. People could make some gains in purchasing power on it, but it wasn't something that you could stand in line at a Starbucks and pay for a cup of coffee for. A friend of mine just did a transaction that took 4 hours for confirmation. And so this is incredibly fast, pretty much instantaneous. The number of transactions that it can process per second is mind-boggling compared to Bitcoin, and it uses almost no power. So it solves all of the issues that I had with Bitcoin.
So it's funny, the ledger field is very broad and people come to it from different directions. Some people 30 years ago were coming to it from making computers not have faults. But they're also concerned about how to create cryptocurrencies, or how to create smart contracts, or how to create stored information, or how to do databases. The database world has been doing this for decades. My interest was slightly different. What I wanted to do was to enable collaboration. My goal is that we should have anyone on Earth at any moment can just wave their hand and carve out a chunk of cyberspace, carve out a world of their own without having to pay anything, for free, create a world of their own, and invite some friends. And now we have a shared world. Anybody should be able to create this shared world. And in this shared world, you and I should be able to create documents and create movies and create 3D objects, and we should be able to collaborate with each other and talk to each other. We should be able to interact in ways where I'm not the dictator of the whole world. I can't delete everything arbitrarily. We should have rules enforced. So maybe it's a fair world where I can't delete things you create. Or maybe it's a fair world where we vote on things. Or maybe it's a world in which we have a stock market and you can make sure that the first bid gets matched up with the first act, not the later ones. We want to have a world that you and I can trust, and that our friends that we have invited, and maybe the strangers we have invited, can trust is going to work the way we want. And we can trust that if my computer dies and is erased, I can get all the data back. The data will never disappear. But to do it totally for free, no server involved, just the computers of the people involved, with complete trust without having to trust any one person in any way, and be able to have this shared world that has the fairness and then the speed. I mean, I want to be able to play games in this world. So I want a ledger where I'm recording every single time a person moves or shoots or picks something up. You want to be able to do a game at, we're talking hundreds of thousands of transactions per second maybe. We want huge speed, and we want complete security. We want privacy. We want no one is spying on us. This isn't funded by advertisements. You want to spy on me so I have better advertisements. We want it just to be something that appears out of nothing that's just living on our computers. And then, when we're able to have a shared world, we want to have multiple shared worlds that connect to each other. So maybe you and I and a few friends set up a little stock market just for ourselves to send things back and forth. The banks do this, they're called dark pools. It's like a little tiny stock market just for a few players that trust each other, sort of, but not entirely. I don't entirely trust you, and there have even been problems with dark pools where maybe banks are taking advantage of some of the information involved, and maybe one bank's hosting the server, but they can manipulate the timing a little bit, and we have to worry about this. I don't want that. I want a completely trustworthy stock market that maybe you and I and a few banks set up, but then I want to have a different stored world that maybe keeps track of a cryptocurrency, and I want them to be able to link so that that cryptocurrency is used to buy and sell our stocks. I want to be able to have a game world that links to a Wikipedia world, where it appears that pieces of Wikipedia are actually part of our world, and as they change in the Wikipedia world, they change in our world. You want to have shared worlds that are interlocking with each other, that allow shared trust even across these things. This is the vision for what we want the internet to be. It will change the way we even look at what cyberspace is, what the internet is, what are networks, even what are computers. This is what's going to happen. And 20 years from now, when the children who are born then are growing up, they're not even going to think about websites and emails as a separate thing and internet and many of the hacking attacks that we have today. They're just going to take it as a matter of course. Anytime I want to, I can wave my hands. I get a shared world. It's free, it's easy, it's trustworthy and reliable. I can invite 2 friends or 1 million friends, and it all just works. And it will change the way we think of what the internet is. That is what I started being interested in building. And this is the direction that we're going. And this is what distributed ledgers do, is they will ultimately allow us to do that. And there's a lot of rough edges. We have growing pains in distributed ledger technology today, but we'll get over the growing pains. We will get to a world that really is fast and secure and fair, and we will be able to then have this vision of shared worlds, big public ones, little private ones, everything connected. That was the idea. That was 5 years ago. So I like playing with math. So I kept playing around with how would you do it, and I convinced myself, yeah, it's impossible. You can't do that. There's no way that you can have really high throughput because, and also have all these security and fairness properties. You just can't do it because ultimately you end up having to tell everybody what you think and then tell people what other people thought, and then you can have millions or billions of extra votes and receipts on votes flowing around. It just doesn't work. So I was able to convince myself it's not possible. And I set it aside, and it would come back and haunt me, and it would keep nagging at me. And so I would pick it up again, and I would spend a couple of days going through it and going through the math and realizing, no, I was right. It really is impossible. You can't do that. And set it aside again. And this kept going for years. I have lots of math problems. Some I've been working on for decades. They just, for whatever reason, I don't know why, they just latch onto me, and I can't get away from them. And eventually, I said, wait a second, if we're all just talking to each other and you include a tiny bit of extra information, we could each end up with a complete history of exactly how we talked to each other in what order. But if I had that, I would know exactly how information flowed through our community. I would know what you know. I would know when you learned it. I would know what you know about what Alice knows, and what you know about what Alice knows about what Bob knows, and about when they learned it. I would know so much that I could take one of those huge, impractical, impossible, too slow voting algorithms and do it with no votes at all. I could just sit here and say, oh, I know how you would vote, so don't bother voting. Don't tell me your vote, I know it. I'll just pretend that you voted, and I'll just pretend, and I'll just get to the conclusion. And so all we do is we just talk the way we would talk anyway to send out our transactions. We had a tiny bit of information, and it gives us this entire history. The history is called a hash graph. You just get this entire hash graph that lets you see such incredible amounts of information about who knows what when, that then you get consensus for free. But that's where we're going, and we're at the very early stages. I mean, the planet is at the early stages of what ledgers can do. And I think whatever you think that ledgers might be able to do, they can do that, but they can also do more. And we are just as a species beginning to learn what the final limits are. And we're pushing as fast as we can along that path.
And so this is the gateway to the next net.
This is it. This is the next net. Technically, the geeks will always know, well, there's multiple layers and the internet's still down there at the bottom just like it always has been. But for the users, what they think of when they think in their mind of what the net is changing. And that's what's going to be different.
At a low energy cost.
Let's talk about energy costs.
You can run this on your cell phone, am I correct? The
Yes.
processor in a cell phone is enough to actually run Hashgraph.
Absolutely. So there are systems that would require you to buy a supercomputer. It's called a mining rig. It's a big box full of specially built chips that don't do anything useful for humanity. They just mine, which means they solve math problems that have no inherent use. The purpose of them is to slow down the network. This isn't sound good, just on the face of it. I'm going to spend a lot of money on a supercomputer, and then I'm going to use a lot of electricity to run my supercomputer, and the whole point of the supercomputer is to slow down the network. But that's what it is. And so proof of work systems work that way. Proof of work is really exciting because it was the first to show us all the possibilities of ledgers. But it's the first generation. We clearly need to move beyond that, and we will, I think, over time. So with Hashgraph, yeah, you could run a full node on your cell phone.
You've accomplished something, a tool that is extremely powerful. What are your hopes and dreams?
My hope and dream is that this pushes us forward along this path to an internet of shared worlds like we've been talking about, where anybody can collaborate with anybody, and the data is stored. You don't have to pay for a server to hold it. It is secure, it is private, where you have the rules enforced. We could set up an organization and trust that elections aren't being rigged because the rules are enforced. You don't have to trust any one person. We could have money and trust that no one's going to inflate the money supply because the rules are enforced and it is guaranteed. We could store the deed to your house, and at any given moment I could know that we're all seeing the same answer as to who owns it, so that you can't sell it to one person and also sell it to someone else at the same time. You'll get caught because it's a publicly visible thing that everyone knows that everyone else is seeing the same thing. I envision a world where the whole internet works this way, where we all know that we can all see the same thing and that rules are enforced, that we have collaboration. And to do that, we need speed, we need security, we need fairness, and my goal is that what we're doing pushes us along that path, because that's the goal that we need to get to, where the nature of the internet itself is different, because it has a trust layer.
Right now, the world economy stands at an alarming precipice. But would it surprise you to learn that the events of today are nothing new? Give me the next few minutes, and I'll show you that there are cycles to history that can not only allow you to see the future, but to make preparations for the very predictable outcomes. You're about to discover that huge financial gyrations, inflation, loss of personal freedom, and out-of-control government are all things that we have been warned about for centuries and are the direct consequences of the monetary system itself. In this double episode, we're going to create a timeline to show the similarities between ancient Rome and the United States today. Just like the USA, Rome started out as a republic after overthrowing a monarchy. So let's begin with their early economy in around 500 BC.
In the early days of the Roman Republic, for the first 178 years, there's no evidence of big inflation. They were using gold and silver coinage mostly as their currency. Small denominations were made out of copper and bronze. Then Hannibal of Carthage starts to harass Rome in something called the Second Punic War. And to pay for this war, they did deficit spending by taking the coins that they took in taxes, melting them down, and adding cheap and abundant base metals, such as copper, so that they could mint more coins. This caused a big inflation, and the inflation was one of the factors that brought the Roman Republic down to a dictatorship, the Roman Empire.
Most of Rome's gold and silver was stored in vaults under the floor of their treasury, which was also known as the Temple of Saturn. If you visit Rome, go to the Forum in the center of the city, where you can still find the ruins of the temple today. And here's something I found really interesting. The U.S. Treasury in Washington, D.C. has almost exactly the same design. So now let's start filling in our timeline of events to keep track of the major similarities between Rome and the USA. We just learned that the early Roman Republic enjoyed a long period of practically no inflation because they used sound money, pure gold and silver. Interestingly, the United States started on the same path. From the late 1700s to the early 1900s, prices were very stable thanks to laws that mandated the use of gold and silver as money, and our people were not robbed by inflation. But in both instances, it was the ongoing debasement of the money for war spending and public works that led to economic chaos.
When you look at the coinage, it started out being an exact measure of copper for the sestertii and silver for the denarii, and by the time it was all over, worth absolutely nothing with perhaps a wash of silver to make it look like the original thing, which is exactly what we're doing now. So these patterns repeat themselves. They always repeat themselves.
The Romans were the first culture to understand that a currency maintains its value because of its rarity. Julius Paulus once said, "This device, being officially promulgated, circulates and maintains its purchasing power not so much from its substance as from its quantity."
Even still, the Romans never stopped churning out more currency, just like the USA today and the ancient Greeks before them. But in their race to debase, the Romans came up with some new twists of their own.
The first of these twists was coin clipping. Whenever a Roman would enter a government building, they'd simply clip the edge off of their gold or silver coin. They would save up all of those clippings, melt them down, and mint more coins, expanding the currency supply.
This was a debasement of the currency. There wasn't a paper currency, but it was a debasement of the currency. In the US, there's a very interesting phenomenon going on where they're not clipping coins, but when you go to the supermarket, you find that the portions of the items at the supermarket on sale are shrinking. You know, the servings on various other consumer products are getting smaller and smaller, but this price is the same. So it's very similar to that old Roman coin clipping trick from 2,000 years ago. It's another form of currency debasement, but it's hidden through cardboard and marketing and fancy presentation, but the people are nevertheless having their currency debased.
The quality of a society is directly proportional to the quality of its money. Stable money leads to stable prices, which leads to a stable society, whereas debasement of the currency leads to the demise of empires.
The major reason for Rome's ongoing currency debasement was to pay for their ever-expanding empire and never-ending wars. The precious metals content of their coinage fell further and further until it had next to no connection with the pure gold and silver that had initially provided them with a stable economy. Cut to today, and we see the same pattern. Up until the outbreak of World War I, the United States had very high levels of precious metals in its coinage, and treasury notes were backed by gold at a 1-to-1 ratio. From there, the USA debased its currency more and more to pay for World War II, the Korean War, and then the Vietnam War, until finally, the link between gold and the US dollar was severed completely. Let's revisit the pivotal event that has managed to sneak under the radar of modern historians as nothing more than a side note, even though it will have repercussions for generations to come. It was an unprecedented act of global debasement by a modern wannabe emperor that would make any Roman ruler hang his head in shame.
Most people think that President Nixon's criminal activities were limited to wiretapping and spying on the competition. But his greatest crime came on August 15th, 1971, when he severed the last ties between the dollar and gold, when he ended the Bretton Woods system.
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
The Bretton Woods system tied all of the world's currencies to gold through the US dollar. But instead of running out and hanging the guy when he took the world off of gold, the world just yawned and accepted that we were now on a fiat currency system, that we were now on this infinitely expanding system, that we no longer had money, we had currency.
Money should be a fixed measure of value. It's like 5,280 feet in a mile. or 12 inches in a foot. I gave the example. Imagine trying to build a house, say 2,500 square feet. If the foot changed each day, it was 12 inches one day, 10 the next, 20 the next. Very hard to do if that's changing. Well, or the clock.
I like, yeah, this.
The 60 minutes an hour. Imagine if they floated the clock. So you had 60 minutes an hour one day, 30 the next, 90 the next. You'd soon have to have hedges, derivatives, futures to figure out how many hours you're working. You're baking a cake. I love this example. And it says bake the batter for 45 minutes. And then you have to figure out, is that inflation adjusted minutes? Is it a California minute, a Nevada minute? Just makes life infinitely complicated. So when you have a fixed measure, when you go to the market, you assume if you're getting 16 ounces of liquid, it's 16, not 13, not 18. Just makes commerce, which is the source of wealth, people doing things with each other, infinitely easier.
It is very odd that we've established a situation where what people do is scramble to borrow liabilities. Certainly, I guess the most attractive liability in the world, or put a different way, the most attractive free trading lie on the planet is the US dollar.
Rather than help the economy, Nixon's actions made things a lot worse, and the public started feeling the effects of inflation much more acutely. It was hard for savers to keep their heads above water unless they had saved in the ultimate stores of value, gold and silver. Just as it had always done throughout history, gold once again accounted for the expanding fiat currency supply by rising in price to cover that supply. Gold had done this as recently as 1934, when the USA's debasement really started heating up and gold was revalued from $20.67 an ounce to $35 an ounce. Now the process began again as the public bid the price up from $35 an ounce in 1971, climbing all the way to $850 an ounce in 1980, easily accounting for the massive quantities of currency the USA had conjured out of thin air now that Nixon had removed all restrictions. Gold had once again held an out-of-control currency to answer. Getting back to the Julius Paulus quote about the value of a currency being decided by the quantity rather than the content, one of the biggest economic hurdles that mankind repeatedly trips on is that we have never been able to control the quantity of currency. And this is one of the reasons why gold has always been the ultimate money. It can't be printed and it keeps us in check. Today, I think cryptocurrencies are a very exciting development and have tremendous possibilities. The bottom line is that governments have a long history of trying to cheat gold, either through debasement or manipulation of the markets. But here's the thing. In the end, gold always wins. And that brings us back to the Romans, who went through many cycles of currency debasement for war spending, then inflation being felt by the public, then revaluation of the currency, then more debasement for deficit spending on war, resulting in even more inflation being felt by the public. The cycle repeated again and again. Those who were able to hold gold outside the official system maintained their purchasing power. Those who did not suffered greatly. In 270 AD, Emperor Aurelian took power and had the now worthless official coinage recalled and minted again to contain a small amount of silver, just 5%. This act brought a new vitality to Rome, but unfortunately it was short-lived as government after government gave in to the temptation of spending beyond their means. Eventually, wars were funded by levying huge taxes on businesses and the rich. This only had the effect of closing down many essential businesses. The more meddling the government did with the economy, the worse things became. The government started confiscating private property by force to fill their empty state coffers. Rome was sliding into ruin. And that brings us to Emperor Diocletian. His actions are the first recorded example of the following hidden secret of money. Wage and price controls do not work. He came to power as inflation was surging, but his decisive actions only added fuel to the fire.
So because the economy was getting worse and worse, Diocletian created a whole bunch of great government solutions. He created a bunch of works projects. He hired a bunch of the homeless and people that were unemployed, made them soldiers and government employees, and this caused deficit spending to just go out of control, and inflation raged into what is known as the first documented hyperinflation. So to get inflation under control, in 301 AD, Diocletian issued his infamous Edict of Prices. This was a massive volume of a list of all of the wages and the prices people could charge for goods and services. And it was all enforced under the penalty of death. So what happened was instead of risking your life to sell something at a profit so that you could stay in business, people just closed up shop. Instead of doing a job that was listed in the book that was below a living wage, people quit their chosen career and tried to pursue a job that wasn't listed in the book. The result of this was that Diocletian came out with a law that said every son had to go into his father's business under the penalty of death.
When governments start meddling with an economy, the result is always the same. Prices become distorted. This is a huge danger because prices act as a signal for an economy. They indicate to producers and buyers where true value lies. The outcome is always economic turmoil, shortages, and black markets. We've seen what happened to gold when Nixon started his economic interference, so now let's go back and see what happened when Diocletian started his jumbo-sized meddling with the economy.
We know when Diocletian created the Edict of Prices that the price of gold was 50,000 denarii per pound. And then we also know from transaction receipts around 50 years later, the price of gold had risen to 1,200,000,000 denarii per pound. That's a 42,400% hyperinflation over a 50-year period. That would be similar to if gold was $35 an ounce 50 years ago. Today, 1 ounce of gold would be about $1.5 million. Another analogy that I can make is if an average family car was about $2,000 50 years ago, today it would be selling for $85 million. Just imagine $85 million on the windshield of a car at a car lot. That's the type of inflation these poor people suffered through.
What are price controls? Prices are supposed to convey information. That's what markets are about, knowledge and information. So a price will tell you something is dear. Oh, get out and produce more. The price is low. Maybe you're producing too many of it. So it's a way of conveyance of information. So you devote your efforts to something that people want, not what a bureaucrat dictates. So when governments trash the money and your prices, nominal prices are going up, the government response is, oh, they're greedy speculators or merchants or whatever, and so you say you can't charge as much. Well, what that means is you get a black market and you hurt the production of the thing. The idea that government can substitute for people interacting among themselves is preposterous.
This pattern of failed price controls is something we see throughout history and across the globe. Skip forward over 1,500 years, and governments still hadn't learned their lesson. During the chaos of the French Revolution, the government issued a set of wage and price controls known as the Law of Maximum, also imposed under the penalty of death. It's worth noting that when wage and price controls are implemented, government always tries to deflect attention away from the problems that it has created itself by shifting the focus to businesses who are labeled as greedy hoarders or price gougers. In reality, most are just average people trying to keep their business afloat, doing their best to deal with the unstable supply and demand curve created by government meddling. And France was no exception to this blame game. During the Law of Maximum, many innocent people were executed, food shortages developed, and black markets ruled until finally, 15 months later, the act was repealed because it didn't work, and all the stored-up energy of government manipulation was unleashed at once, leading to a further period of chaos and inflation for France. I agree with Steve Forbes. The idea of wage and price controls is absolutely preposterous. Now we'll skip forward another 200 years and government was at it again. Many people don't realize that Nixon's speech from 1971 also included the announcement of a 90-day wage and price freeze. The United States was suffering from big inflation thanks to deficit spending for the Vietnam War. Silver had been taken out of circulation in 1965, reducing our coinage to worthless flecks of base metal, and the paper currency supply had been expanded greatly. Did that sound familiar? Just like Diocletian, Nixon's team of economic boffins thought they could curb inflation by fixing wages and prices.
The time has come for decisive action, action that will break the vicious circle of spiraling prices and costs. I am today ordering a freeze on all prices and wages throughout the United States for a period of 90 days. Working together, we will break the back of inflation.
You'd think that these people would learn from history, but they don't. To get an idea of how out of touch the men with their hands on the economic levers were, listen to what Nixon's advisor had to say about the duration of the controls.
Would it be your anticipation that it would take more than 90 days to break the back of inflation, as the President put it tonight, that there would have to be a further extension of an actual wage price freeze?
I would not, no, I wouldn't. I don't think one can say that it will necessarily take longer. We're sailing to some extent in an uncharted sea here, but this I think is a reasonable estimate of the time that's going to be required.
The President's address tonight comes against a background of the following facts, among others: record high gold prices and rapidly increasing cost of living figures for most Americans. The wholesale price index rose by 2.1% during the month of May. The index of industrial commodities in the last 3 months has risen at an annual rate of 15.9%, the worst since the Korean War 20 years ago. All of that part of the general background of the President's remarks tonight. Every American family is confronted with a real and pressing problem of higher prices. And I have decided that the time has come to take strong and effective action to deal with that problem. Effective immediately, therefore, I am ordering a freeze on prices. This freeze will hold prices at levels no higher than those charged during the first 8 days of June. It will cover all prices paid by consumers.
What kind of an idiot would do the same thing over and over and expect different results each time? And it's the same pattern that's happened repeatedly, cycle after cycle after cycle after cycle for thousands of years. A country borrows itself into bankruptcy. It creates more money to try to pay its debt. Prices go up. People rebel. The whole system falls apart. And I'm scared about it. Countries collapse over this. They go to war about this kind of thing. Rebellion in the street, overthrows of government, the whole 9 yards. There is nothing to be gained from inflation and everything to lose, and we're going to lose everything.
Around the world, people don't seem to realize that government intervention always makes things worse. It's the government manipulating things. Whenever you manipulate something and try and control it over here, and not allow the free markets to balance everything all by themselves, something comes squirting out way over here that you just don't expect. For instance, the dot-com bubble popped in 2000. Alan Greenspan lowered interest rates to try and get the stock markets back up again, and he accidentally created a real estate bubble that's now devastating the world. Back during World War I, they inflated the currency supply tremendously. The Federal Reserve was born just at the beginning of World War I. We added to the currency supply by adding bonds to back our currency along with gold. Then there was this big, it's called the Depression of 1921. It's the single greatest deflation that the U.S. has ever seen. It's bigger than the Great Depression. The contraction of the currency supply was huge. The reason nobody knows about the Depression of 1921, they only know of the stock market crash of 29 and the Great Depression, is because the government did not rush in to save us. The Federal Reserve didn't try to suddenly lower interest rates down to zero. They didn't manipulate the free markets. They let the free markets work. It was horrible for a year. There were bankruptcies and foreclosures. People lost homes and things like that. But the bankruptcies and the businesses that folded, there were new businesses that were more efficient, that grew up to take their place. And when a home gets foreclosed on, it gets resold to somebody else. And yes, it was horrible, but the people that were leveraged out, or the people that weren't in full control of their finances, or the inefficient businesses that were just hanging on by a thread anyway, yeah, they went under. But because the government didn't rush in to save us, and the Federal Reserve didn't try and manipulate the economy, the free markets healed it all, and in 18 months it was a memory. In fact, 10 years later, nobody could even remember the memory. It was gone.
Mark Twain is often quoted as saying, "History doesn't repeat, but it sure does rhyme." And as you've seen from this episode, that sure rings true.
The wage and price controls, we will probably end up trying this in the United States sometime in the future. And you know, they tried it during Diocletian. It didn't work. It destroys the economy, and eventually they have to repeal the act. They tried it during the French Revolution. It didn't work. It ruins the economy, and they have to repeal it. Nixon tried it. It didn't work. It ruined the economy, and they had to repeal it. It's not going to work the next time they try it. This stuff just keeps on happening over and over and over again, and part of it is caused by the 4-year election cycle. All of the politicians are worried about what's going to happen on their watch, and they push all the problems forward to the next administration. They really don't care what's going to happen out in the future. They care what's happening, you know, how they're remembered. So I'm expecting this to happen in the United States sometime. Right now I'm expecting a deflation, but when we get to big inflation or hyperinflation, you can pretty much count on the fact that they're going to make the same stupid mistakes because politicians do not read monetary history.
Now we're going to continue our journey through to the fall of Rome and learn of more striking parallels with the United States along the way.
The Romans were the first culture to have social programs. The Athenians had great public works, and they had the expense of war. But in Rome, they had the expense of all their great public works. They had the expense of massive armies occupying foreign lands, and they had the expense of social programs. During the end of the Roman Empire, Rome's population was approximately 1 million people, and 200,000 of them, 20%, were receiving daily distributions of wheat. That's welfare.
As their empire decayed, Roman leaders employed a tactic called bread and circus to keep the public distracted and placated. The bread refers to the free grain, also known as the dole, and circus translates to the games that would be held here in the Colosseum with free food, wine, and rather violent entertainment. I find it absolutely fascinating to try to imagine what was happening here nearly 2,000 years ago. These seats would have been filled with people eating and drinking, many would be yelling for their favorite gladiator, and a good portion of the audience would have been mindlessly drunk. The emperors and elite watching from up on high? What a scene! So the Colosseum is a great example of both the huge expense of Roman public works and the endless deficit spending they carried out to pay for supposedly free stuff. But is there such a thing as a free lunch? So now let's continue filling in our timeline from the previous episode so that we can keep track of where we are in the story. Welfare, bread, and circus were basically distraction tactics used by the ruling elite who would offer promises of free stuff to ingratiate themselves with the public. There's a famous quote from the satirist Juvenal who summed up the situation very succinctly. Give them bread and circus, and they will never revolt. The citizens felt like they were getting these things for free when they were actually paid for by a crushing double blow of continuous currency debasement and increased taxation. In the end, the only way that the Roman rulers could enforce this tax collection was by doubling down on their stifling bureaucracy. The size of their government compared to the private sector exploded, business became incredibly difficult, and many simply gave up. Steve Forbes just mentioned how difficult the situation became for farmers, or husbandmen as they were referred to in the past. Here's a quote that backs that up from Lactantius around 300 AD. There began to be fewer men who paid taxes than there were who received wages, so that the means of the husbandman, being exhausted by enormous impositions, the farms were abandoned, cultivated grounds became woodland, and universal dismay prevailed.
All of these tourists go through the Colosseum here, all amazed at the ruins of a great civilization. I don't think any of them are thinking about the fact that most countries on the planet are doing exactly the same thing today.
Most of what Americans know, I fear, is what movie stars are doing, what sports stars are doing, and what occurred on the last reality show. And the food stamps are not even food stamps anymore. They give you a credit card that you can buy your food with so that you look like you can actually afford to eat as opposed to living off the dole. It's very similar.
People's relationship to money in a country like America, the biggest economy in the world, is based entirely on the benefits they get from consuming and consumerism. And right now, you have an era of popularization of drugs that are being used, like Prozac and other drugs, that people are taking massive quantities of while they're consuming popular culture for instant gratification. So you have instant gratification enhanced by drugs with a consumer culture with easy credit. So people are literally high all day long. They're consuming, they're on drugs, they've got cheap sugar, they've got cheap high fructose corn syrup in America thanks to those massive government subsidies. So they're basically spinning their tits 24/7, 365. Now, as soon as that value proposition changes and you're not getting high as easily as you did yesterday, the cost of getting blitzed out of your skull on cheap drugs, cheap sugar, and cheap entertainment tips to an actual cost where you've got to actually put in a day's labor, then you're going to see social unrest. Then you're going to see real change because those people suddenly are going to be facing reality without the benefit of being on drugs. And that's going to be a day when suddenly this economic model of consumption at the expense of humanity comes to a screeching halt.
So the ancient Romans had welfare, bread, and circus. Today, the USA has welfare and mass distraction. We've had the Colosseum-like venues for our games and theater for a long time, and now we also have people filling these Colosseums to watch digital gladiators battle each other in virtual esports events. These sporting and electronic spectacles, along with mindless entertainment like talk shows, are piped directly into our homes on TV or now even to the cell phones in our pockets. We have the same politicians who constantly make impossible promises of free stuff, and a good portion of the population are hypnotized into believing them thanks to our modern version of bread and circus. Just like in ancient Rome, the USA has increased taxation in an attempt to pay for all of the so-called free stuff. And not surprisingly, we are now also burdened with a stifling bureaucracy in order to enforce the ridiculous amount of rules, taxes, and regulations. The size and scope of government has gone past anything that the founders of our country could have imagined in their worst nightmares, and now we face the same problem as ancient Rome. There are now fewer and fewer productive individuals and businesses left to fund the buffoonery of government. Remember, governments cannot create prosperity, they can only consume it. We're going to meet a new friend who belongs to the group of people who suffer the most under burdensome laws and taxation: small business owners and entrepreneurs. These individuals are the lifeblood of an economy, and when a government stands in their way, it stands in the way of progress, choice, and a higher standard of living for us all.
We believe that government is very poor at doing things, and that if government was running your restaurant, it would not be exceptional.
We agree. He agrees and I do too.
One of the things that we feel is difficult and dangerous these days is that people are very upset with the economy and they want the government to do something about it. And I believe that the best thing that government could do is to make it easier for small businessmen like you to do your job. This is what makes the economy good.
Absolutely true. The government and the state is really not helping the small business in any way. If I had government help, it could probably open more of them.
You don't need government money though. What you need is just for government to get out of the way and make it easier to go into business. Not so many rules, not so many taxes, right?
Dice sì, a questo punto non è neanche più un discorso di capitale, è un discorso di amministrazione e di tasse. Exactly.
Yeah. In ancient Rome, The government was telling you how much you could pay your workers, and no more, no less. The government was telling you how much you could charge for that buffalo mozzarella and that flatbread. If the government told you everything you could do, would you want to stay in business even?
Assolutamente no.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Diventa un McDonald's totale.
It just becomes a big McDonald's for everybody.
We live in a state we call the People's Republic of California because the government has made so many rules. It is becoming very difficult for a small businessman.
Ma anche qua in Italia.
Here,
anche qua in Italia.
it's the same problem.
Ci stanno portando via dall'Italia per quello che mi riguarda. Cioè, se
It's
io
like
avessi
they are trying to do everything to take us away from this country.
The role of government, among other things, is creating an environment where people can go out and do creative things. Our founders understood we are born with certain energies. The question is, are those energies going to be directed in a positive way or a destructive way? You know, there are two ways you can get ahead. One is to steal it from your neighbor, and the other is to go out and provide a product or service that somebody else wants, create something that hadn't existed before out of your mind. You take the risk and you do it, and we all benefit from it. And that's why it's so important to have that proper environment. And what makes up that environment? Well, you don't have to be a PhD. In fact, it'll probably get in your way. One is the rule of law, where you know what the rules are. Sound money, sensible taxation. Taxes are a price and a burden. And if you lower that burden, people are able to focus and do more real things, making it easy to set up a legitimate business. Just basic rules, and people will do amazing things. Amazing amount of creativity can be released. But beware of government saying we're here to help you. Usually they end up harming us all. Government benefits, but not the rest of us.
One of the things I've noticed is we keep on putting people in charge that not only don't know anything about monetary history, but they don't know the fundamental economics that a normal businessman would know. Any businessman owner, or just somebody that is able to control their own finances at home. What they hire are people that, they're quants that have theories in their head. They've got some book knowledge, but they've never actually hired a person. They've never made the books balance or had to go out and make sure that there's more profit coming in this month than expenses so that they don't go out of business.
That's exactly right. It's exactly right. It's this fascination, this love affair that the world has with academic economists in the last 20 years. You know, I think you'll find, like everything else, it goes full circle. And at some point in the next 20 years, we'll have central banks staffed exclusively by successful business people who've been brought in to fix the mess that you know, bureaucrats and academics have fostered upon us.
Actually, I think an even better future would be a world without central banks, where the free market is left alone to decide what money is. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. Anyway, back to the story. Let's look at the last two entries on our timeline for both ancient Rome and the USA and see if we can use them to predict what comes next. If you have more currency flowing into the government in the form of taxes, and then multiply that by more bureaucrats, what does that equal? If you guessed the corruption of the political process, you'd be spot on. In ancient Rome, one of the fastest ways to accumulate personal wealth was to hold office and bestow favors on individuals or businesses in return for gifts. In other words, bribery. In the modern USA, I hate to say it, but not a lot has changed. Cronyism is now the norm in Washington. This is where industries and individuals can basically buy a politician to vote a certain way. In some cases, we've seen their influence extend to the highest levels, where outsiders are writing the legislation and having their cronies introduce it. We've also seen the advent of revolving door politics, where politicians may not take cash directly as bribes, but as soon as they've fulfilled their purpose in politics, they walk out the door of public disservice and into highly paid positions in the private sector. How convenient. So, when we take a look at our timeline, the parallels are really starting to stack up. Our political and monetary experiments never seem to end, and I know I'm not the only one who feels like we are accelerating towards something really big. Now I'd like to introduce you to my friend Chris Martenson. He has an absolutely wonderful series called The Crash Course that I highly recommend that you watch. Chris is a scientist and entrepreneur who does an excellent job of clarifying complex systems and scenarios. So I wanted to get his take on why it feels like we're speeding toward the edge of a cliff. Tell me about exponential growth, because this was one of the pieces in your series that I was blown away by.
You know, it's there's this famous quote by Keynes that not one man in a million understands inflation. The inflation process is very important. I think it's one man in a billion that probably understands what exponential growth is, and it's one of the most important things that we could get our arms around. And the reason it's so difficult to talk about is because we're humans and we're not wired for exponential growth. We think in linear form. So if something goes from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, people get a sense of that. We know how that works. But when something goes from 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16 to 32 and just mushrooms off, well, it's much harder to understand it, and we're surrounded by exponential growth. It's in our economy, it's in our monetary numbers, it's in our debt numbers, it's in environmental statistics, it's in how rapidly we're depleting things in an inverse exponential decay, it's in everywhere we're surrounded by. So understanding is really critical. So I have a couple examples to help people understand what exponential growth is and why it's so hard. So if I had 2 erasers, and I said, all right, I'm going to give you $100 based on how evenly you can bring these 2 erasers together, nice even speed, you'll do a great job at that, right? You'll win $100 from me every single time. But now let's replace them 2 big heavy magnets, you know, neodymium magnets, maybe from a Tesla coil, you know, something really awesome. And you'll do what everybody does. All of a sudden they'll snap together, right? And it's because these magnets are pulling together with exponential force. And even though you might be physically capable of controlling that, your mind and your muscles and your neurons won't be able to wire that up. I'll give you 100 shots and it'll still be doing this because we just aren't wired for that. Another exponential example that really helps bring this home. Do you have a park, like a favorite park that you wouldn't mind see getting ruined?
How about, I think they're going to decommission Candlestick Park
Candlestick.
at San Francisco.
Perfect.
Area.
All right, let's use that as an example. So here's the thought experiment. Imagine I have a magic eyedropper, and it's magic because the drop of water that comes out of this eyedropper will double every minute. So after 1 minute, you get 2 drops, and after 2 minutes, you get 4 drops, and after 6 minutes, you can fill the thimble up, right? All right, so let's do 2 things. We're gonna make this part watertight. And I'm going to handcuff you to the highest row of bleacher seats. And let's start this tomorrow, 12 o'clock. You're handcuffed up in this highest row of bleacher seats, and I go down right into the center of the field, and I put one of these magic drops down. Now, here's the question. How long do you have to escape from your handcuffs, knowing that this park is going to fill up with water?
Okay, 1 drop, and it's got to fill the entire park. How about a day?
A day. Good, that's close. What if I told you the answer is 50 minutes?
Wow.
You can think 51 minutes, you know, if you want to get rid of the skepticism, right? Mm-hmm. So that's amazing, right? Just 50 or 51 minutes, and it's all over. The whole park is full. That's not the important question. Here's the important question. At what time is this park still 97% empty space? It's not filled with water. And do you realize the seriousness of your predicament?
Well, I know it would be half full 1 minute before my predicament. So, I don't know, 10 minutes?
It's 5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay.
So if we go back just 5 minutes in time, there's a little bit of water in the infield. And then 5 more minutes and it's over. And so when I look at this, I look across the world and I think, okay, from all of human history until 1960 to put the first 3 billion people on the planet, and then just 40 years to put the next 3 billion people on the planet. And this is important because the Earth is our stadium, and we're living through one of the most extraordinary periods of human history, not just American history, not just in our personal lifetime history, but human history, because you and I will be alive during a time when human population will have fully tripled from roughly 3 billion to 9 billion if we live to ripe old ages. It's extraordinary. It's putting pressure on everything, and that exponential human growth is putting the curve on all those charts we just talked about. How fast we're depleting oil, how much food we have to grow, airline miles traveled, loss of tuna from the oceans, how much money has to be created. All of that is being driven by this exponential process. And so something I really like to be able to communicate to people is that exponential processes speed up at the end. So if anybody watching this has the sense that maybe things are going faster and it's harder to keep up with events and wait, what's happening in Europe? It seems to be crumbling fairly quickly. That's because we have all these exponential processes converging on this one moment in time, and yes, things really are speeding up here and now.
The system they have is failing. It's falling apart. Keynesianism won't work. To me, we're in the beginning stages of what happened to the Soviet system. We may be like at 1987 in the Soviet system, where 2 years later, 4 years later, it was gone. And that could happen to us. And as long as people will still use the dollar, it's going to continue. But we're getting dangerously close. And the end stages of a currency system comes rapidly. So even though we've been slipping and sliding for 100 years, our dollar is now worth 2 cents over 100 years. That's pretty much of a crash, but it isn't a crash in the sense of going off a cliff. And I believe that history shows that currencies eventually can go off a cliff when a false confidence is just dissipated. And we have a confidence, but it's based on all false notions and maybe out of desperation, a lot of rigging. But anyway, it's still working. The dollar, although weaker as an international currency, still works. But that is what we, as a people, and not only the United States, around the world, have to fear, because it will affect the whole world when this comes. And this is why this issue, for me, is so important.
We are in big trouble, and there's just no way out. And I am sorry to say about that. And I love my country, and I'm sick to death about what's happening to it because of morons in government and a big bunch of morons in academia who let the Federal Reserve do what it did. It's all so simple. It could have all been prevented, but just by following the damn Constitution. Money shall only be silver and gold. How simple can it be? It's less than a dozen words. And all you got to do is follow that. Yeah, we have got a prayer. We haven't got, only people who got a prayer are the people who are buying silver and gold today. You and me.
What amazes me are the stark similarities between ancient Rome and today. Once again, we're debasing the currency to pay for war, social programs, public works, while we keep the society placated with bread and circuses, football, sports, American Idol, Dancing with the Stars. Our government keeps on getting bigger as our military aspirations expand our empire. Congressman Ron Paul recently stated that we have over 900 military bases in 130 countries. That is an empire.
And that brings us to one of the most dangerous parallels between ancient Rome and the USA, the excessive influence of the military on government. Rome's elite realized very early on that keeping the military happy was of the utmost importance if they were to either gain or stay in power. As a result, the military grew in size and attained high levels of leverage throughout politics. In today's USA, we spend trillions of dollars on our military, and it has grown into a behemoth. Much of the revolving door politics mentioned earlier comes as a result of the massive deficit spending that we pump into so-called national defense. Our country has become a war machine. We are on offense, not defense, and there is now an entire industry reliant on keeping things this way. And it's not as though we haven't been warned about this. In fact, alarm bells have been ringing for longer than 50 years. I'd like to show you part of a very important speech from the year 1961. President Eisenhower had just served 2 full terms in office, and he was just about to hand over the presidency to John F. Kennedy. Despite his own military background as a 5-star general and the supreme commander of the Allied forces in Europe during World War II, Eisenhower chose one of the most important moments of his presidency, his own farewell address to the nation, to warn America of the dangers of the corrupting influence of what he famously termed the military-industrial complex.
Until the latest of our world conflicts, the United States had no armaments industry. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. we have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists.
I am an American, Mike, and there's a lot of criticism of our country and where it's been and where it's going, and I'm part of that group. I use a phrase picked up from Chalmers Johnson called sorrows of empire. And what he points out is that when you have what I call forever wars, and that seems to be what's happening since 9/11, wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and Libya, add in Yemen still today, on top of disruptions everywhere, these wars are expensive. We've never had the stand down of our armies. And at the same time, the extended powers of the government have taken away a lot of our personal freedoms. So publicly in the NSA revelations from Snowden, but we as people were built on a country with mild government. Restrictions on what the government can do were the constitutional sources. So you combine wars, personal freedom loss, and a control of us through the deceptions, and you've got a system that feeds on itself and we can't afford. $1.2 trillion if you add the spooks, the hidden parts, the veterans, the energy departments, nuclear operations for weapons all together, and a bit of interest on the debt. It's almost half our budget that we spend on this military. And that's not a good direction. I hope we could go to more peace and avoid the sorrows of empire that are too expensive. And when you spend $1.2 trillion on your military, the effects are destructive on your economy. In other words, the supposed spending for strengthening our country on military is destroying our economy.
When we were in Rome, it was to see how a great society, a great empire, can completely collapse and fade into history because of deficit spending and currency debasement, because of all the things that the U.S. is doing today, because they were trying to fund these armies that are occupying foreign lands just like the U.S. is doing today, because they were trying to have bread and circuses, what we call guns and butter, while they were funding all of this war. And all the deficit spending and currency debasement to pay for it is one of the key factors in what brought Rome down. And this great civilization faded into history. And not only that, but they lost for a long time. The technologies were lost, all the knowledge and insight that they had, the standard of living. I mean, we were plunged into the Dark Ages.
But there's another side of this story that is rarely heard or explained. To me, what you're about to learn is something that absolutely cements the importance of sound money and how it is foundational to a prosperous society. As Rome was struggling in the late 4th century, Emperor Flavius Theodosius divided the Roman Empire into 2 parts, each to be ruled by one of his own sons. The Western Roman Empire kept Rome as its capital. Economically, it was soon crippled beyond salvation by the repetition of the misguided monetary practices you've learned about in these episodes, and it's generally considered by historians to have fallen around the year 476 AD. While the Western Empire crumbled, the Eastern Empire flourished for a further 1,000 years. Its capital was Constantinople, known today as Istanbul. The Eastern Empire changed their official language to Greek, and even though their own people at the time referred to themselves as being part of the Roman Empire, today we know them by a different name, the Byzantine Empire. So why did the Western Roman Empire fall while the East flourished? I believe a major part of the answer is contained in two simple words: sound money. The Byzantine Empire based their monetary system on a coin originally minted on a small scale by our friend Emperor Diocletian. It was called the Circus. It weighed just 4.5 grams, or 1/7 of an ounce, and was made of pure gold. The Byzantine rulers had learned from their own history, and they made a conscious choice to avoid the continual pattern of debasement that Rome had suffered from, with amazing results. They defended the purity of the Circus for a further 600 years, until 1034, when, you guessed it, the same old story started to play out. The debasement of the Circus was gradual at first, but it soon accelerated, and the coin was eliminated less than 60 years later in 1092. A new gold coin, the HBAR, was issued in place of the Circus, and its purity was maintained at 85% gold until the early 1200s, until it too was debased. By the 1350s, it had no gold content at all and served merely as a unit of account. Is it a coincidence that this time period matches that of the decline of the Byzantine Empire? It's impossible to say for sure, but I'd like to say once again that I believe that the quality of a society is directly proportional to the quality of its money. There are many factors that all contributed to the fall of Rome, but in these episodes, I wanted to draw your attention primarily to the economics. Because when you study monetary history, two things become crystal clear. The first is that bureaucratic, managed economies always lead to disaster, and the second is that monetary debasement brings the fall of empires. So could this same pattern of currency debasement that we have seen time and time again throughout history happen to the United States? Take a look around. It's happening right now. But the big difference this time is that it's like all those other times in history, times a million. This time it's global. But what concerns me most isn't the loss of our financial wealth, it's the loss of our freedom. All of this meddling in the free markets that they have done, and the price that we are going to pay because of that meddling, is going to cause a loss in confidence in the free market system and capitalism. We don't have free markets, and we haven't had since 1913. You cannot have free markets if you don't have free market money. The currency is 50% of every transaction there is in society, and if you have a small group of men at the central bank having a meeting each month, in the United States it's called the Open Market Committee, the FOMC, deciding how much currency there's going to be in the system and what the cost of that currency is, the interest rates, that's a manipulated market by definition. You've got a few people deciding what it's going to be. That's 50% of every transaction. Therefore, there is no transaction in this society that isn't manipulated. So we don't have, when people say that the free markets are failing, we do not have free markets. When people say that capitalism is failing, we don't have capitalism. We've got cronyism. We've got special favors being granted by Congress to the people that lobby them, and it skews the economy and warps the economy and creates all of these artificial bubbles that end up popping, and then everybody loves living in a bubble, so they just want the Fed to create the next one.
What's happening in Washington doesn't indicate that all of a sudden they're going to gain in wisdom and make the tough choices, which is sort of like getting somebody off drugs, and people don't want to quit the drugs. And our system is based on debt and inflation, and they're not going to wean themselves off. So we have to anticipate there's going to be a major collapse. But then the big question is, are we going to have a greater move toward totalitarianism and give up all our freedom, or are we going to say we still have a spirit left in this country to say, yes, we overstretched and we know what the alternative could be, and we can build a much better society? Milton Friedman, the great economist, once said, when government
in pursuit of good intentions, tries to rearrange the economy, legislate morality, or help special interests, the cost comes at inefficiency, lack of innovation, and loss of freedom. Government should be a referee, not an active player. In the United States, government has gone way too far. It is proven, beyond a shadow of a doubt, time after time throughout history, that managed economies do not work. Free markets have always won, and they have always provided a higher standard of living. When people cry out for the government to do something about it, they're asking for the government to manage the economy. They are asking for the government to lower their standard of living. Ultimately, what you get is the USSR or Mao's China. That is what a managed economy brings you. It's time for you to take action. It's time for you to get educated on this, to find out more, and then to voice your opinion, to make yourself heard.
If we want changes in the economy and changes in our monetary system, change in our foreign policy, the people have to speak out and decide that they want to change, and they have to make it very clear to the politicians that that's what they expect. And matter of fact, that's one area where I tend to be more optimistic, because I think the people are learning with the work that you've done and others. They're learning something about monetary policy. But the most important thing is that people understand the nature of freedom and the role of government, and money being a major part of all that.
So now that we've seen the economics of the fall of Rome, it's time to take a look at the options in front of us for the USA. Will we choose more debasement, more war, more intrusive government, more cronyism and special interests, more taxation and regulation, and less freedom? Or will we choose sound money, stable foreign policy, restrained government, a level playing field of fair laws for everyone, sensible taxation and regulation, and maximum freedom?